Hello, my friends, and welcome to Ranger Screams. Did you know that 82.6% of our viewers aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy scary park ranger stories, please subscribe, leave a like, and comment. Let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments on this video. I upload new horror stories every day. Thank you for your support, and now let's begin. I saw him from about 100 yards down the Cinder Creek Trail, standing at the fork where the old logging road cuts north toward the ridge. October cold. The kind of cold that turns the puddles to glass overnight and makes the frost sit on the pine needles like sugar. He was turning in a slow circle, head tilted, studying the trees as if he'd never seen one before. I was 2 years into my career at White Pine Ridge National Park. 26 years old, still eager, still stupid. My boots crunched on the frozen gravel as I closed the distance. Standard approach, deliberate, non-threatening, hands visible. He heard me coming from about 30 yards out and turned, and the relief on his face was the exact expression I'd been trained to look for, the look of a lost hiker who's just spotted salvation. "Afternoon, sir," I called. "Everything all right?" "Oh, thank God," he said, and started walking toward me. "I've been out here since morning." He was maybe 50, thick through the chest, dressed in decent gear. Gray wool hat pulled low, green canvas jacket that looked well used, brown hiking pants tucked into leather boots, a day pack slung over one shoulder. Nothing about him triggered any of the warnings I'd been taught to notice. No visible injury, no confusion in his eyes, no obvious signs of hypothermia despite the temperature. We met in the middle of the trail. He extended his hand. "Warren Ashby," he said. "God, am I glad to see somebody." I shook his hand. His palm was cool, colder than the air, I remember thinking, though I dismissed it at the time. Everyone's cold in October. "Ranger Silas Merrow. You lost, sir?" "Very. I got turned around somewhere near the creek about 3 hours ago. My party went ahead. I stopped to take a photo, and when I looked up, I couldn't figure out which way they'd gone." "How many were you with?" "4 others. My brother-in-law and some friends. They'll be at the North Trailhead by now if they haven't doubled back looking for me." He gave a rueful laugh. "Probably furious. I'm the reason we're always late." I reached for the radio on my shoulder. "Let me call it in. We can get your group notified, get you routed back to them the quick way." The change happened in the space between one breath and the next. His smile stayed exactly where it was. The muscles of his face didn't move, but something behind his eyes went out. A light snuffed. What was left looking at me was flat and cold, and interested in the way a cat is interested in a moth against a window. "No," he said. "That's really not necessary." I paused with my hand on the radio. "Sir, it's no trouble. It's standard procedure when a member of a party is separated. I'd rather just be pointed in the right direction. I don't want to make anyone drive out here." "They're already out here, sir. It's what we do." "No." His voice had a new edge now. Not angry, just final. "I don't want you to make that call." That was when I noticed the second thing. We were standing in a patch of morning sun that fell through a gap in the pines. I could see my own breath, plumes of it, every exhale a small white cloud that hung and dissolved. Warren Ashby was talking. His mouth was moving. His chest was rising and falling. Nothing was coming out of him. No vapor, no fog, no sign of a warm body in cold air. I made myself look at the ground. My shadow lay across the trail behind me, long and dark, and shaped exactly like a man in a ranger uniform. On the other side of us, in the same slant of sun, the trail was clean, uninterrupted. Nothing. He cast nothing. 10 seconds passed. 20. I felt very cold in a place inside my chest that had never been cold before. The memory of Iona Cheska sat down beside me in that moment. Uninvited, but very clear. Iona had been a ranger at White Pine for 33 years by the time I started. Silver hair pulled back in a braid, hands like tree roots, a face that had forgotten how to be surprised. She'd caught me alone in the equipment shed at the end of my first week, and put her hand flat on the workbench next to mine. "You'll meet things in this park," she'd said, "that will look like people. Some of them will be very good at it. When you meet one, you'll know. Your body will know before your mind does. Listen to your body." I'd nodded politely and thought she was working up to a retirement joke. There are 3 ways to spot them mostly. They don't breathe like we do. They don't throw shadows the way we do. And they will refuse the help you offer them, because they are not what they say they are, and taking help is not what they are here for. I had asked her what to do if I met one. "You back away," she'd said. "You do not run. You do not argue. You do not turn your back on it until it is out of sight. You walk on the trail away from it, and then you never talk about it except to another ranger who has met one too." I let my hand drop from the radio, slowly. "You know what, Mr. Ashby, you're probably right. It's a nice enough day. If you keep going southwest along this trail here, you'll hit the visitor center in about 2 miles. Your group can be radioed from there." I kept my voice steady. I hoped my face was steady too. He didn't move. He watched me, his head tilted very slightly, the same angle a bird uses when it's decided a thing is food. "On second thought," he said, "I think I would like your help after all, Ranger Marrow." I had not told him my first name. "I really have to complete my patrol, sir. You're on the right trail. Southwest. 2 miles." I took a step back. He didn't take a step forward, but I could feel him wanting to. "I'll be seeing you again, Ranger." I didn't respond. I took another step back. Another. When I judged I was around the bend, I turned and walked. Not ran. Walked, at the pace of a man who has patrol left to do. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to break into a sprint. I made it around the second switchback before I looked. The trail behind me was empty. No footprints in the frost except the ones I'd left coming in. Not one. I got out my radio then. My hand was shaking so much I had to press it against my chest to keep it still. "Base Marrow. I need a check on all registered parties on the Cinder Creek network today, specifically anyone missing a member." The dispatcher, a good kid named Gus who worked weekends, came back a minute later. "Nothing outstanding, Silas. Everyone who signed in has checked in. Why?" "Ran into a man who said his group went ahead without him. Name he gave me was Warren Ashby. Middle-aged, green jacket, 5'10", just wanted to confirm." Pause. Rustling of paper. "No Ashby on any of today's rosters. No party of 5 on Cinder Creek at all today. You want us to send someone?" I thought about what I'd tell them. That I'd met a man who didn't breathe. Negative, just noting it. I'll write it up when I'm back. I finished my patrol. It took another 4 hours. I checked over my shoulder maybe 200 times. He didn't come back. That night I sat at the little pine desk in my staff cabin. There was a leather-bound journal in the drawer that my mother had given me when I graduated from the Ranger Academy. I had never written in it. I hadn't been able to think of anything worth putting down. I opened it to the first page. I sat there for a long time. Then I wrote, at the top, in careful block letters. Rule 1. If someone claims to be lost but refuses your help when you offer it, walk away. Do not argue. Do not push. Leave. They are not what they appear to be. I underlined it. I closed the journal. I put it back in the drawer. I didn't sleep well for a week. 2 months later, I was on solo patrol on the Miller Basin Loop, a 5-mile circuit that wound down through the old cedar groves in the west quadrant. December. Snow on the ground, but thin, more like a dusting of confectioner's sugar on frozen mud, the kind of afternoon light that makes the whole forest look like it's holding its breath. I had learned by then to walk quietly, not because it was required, because the park had begun to feel, in ways I couldn't articulate to anyone who hadn't spent a season in it, like a room you should not disturb. The voice came at me from about 50 yards to my left, off the trail, deep in the cedar shadow. Hello? Is somebody there? Please, is somebody there? A boy's voice. Maybe 10, maybe 11. Frightened but trying to be brave about it. the way children do when they've been told to be a big boy about things. I stopped where I was. My boots creaked in the cold. I did not turn my head. Please, I got lost from my dad. He was right behind me, and now I can't find him. Every instinct I had, every hour of training in wilderness search and rescue, every fiber of the man I had been before Warren Ashby, wanted me to turn and cover the distance in a dead sprint. A child was crying in the woods. That is a bell that rings in a very old part of the human brain. I made myself remember Tomas. Tomas Ibarra had been a ranger for 6 years by the time I started. Big, gentle, a former high school football coach who'd changed careers in his 40s. He was on solo patrol on the North Face in the fall of my first year when he heard a woman calling for help from somewhere below the trail. He radioed it in. He said he was going down to investigate. He said the woman sounded hurt. They found him at the bottom of a scree slope 3 days later. His neck was broken. His arms and legs were bent in directions bones don't bend in. Iona had told me at the wake that his face was set in an expression she had trouble looking at. The search team went over the whole area for a mile in every direction. There was no woman. There had never been a woman. There were no other footprints besides his own leading down the slope. I stayed on the trail. Sir? Sir, I can see your uniform. Please, I know you're right there. My mouth was dry. I could feel my heart in my throat. I started walking again. Slow, steady. The pace of a man on patrol who has not heard anything at all. Wait. Please don't leave. My dad's really hurt. His leg is bleeding really bad. Please. I did not turn. I did not answer. I kept my flashlight in my hand, but I did not shine it into the cedars. Shining a light on it, Iona had told me once, was a way of admitting you had seen it. Sometimes that was worse than pretending you hadn't. The voice tracked with me. It kept perfect pace, moving through the cedars parallel to the trail, always at the same distance, always at the same 50 yards. There was no crunch of feet in the frozen duff, no breaking of small twigs, just the voice coming from the shadows, at the height a child's mouth would be. Please, my name is Aaron Fisk. My dad and I are camping at Bethel Point. Please help us. I made a note of the name without meaning to. Aaron Fisk, Bethel Point. Later, I would check the roster. There was no Fisk registered anywhere in the park. There was no boy of any name at Bethel Point that week. At around a quarter mile in, the voice started to change. Why are you ignoring me? What kind of person ignores a kid in the woods? Are you deaf? Are you stupid? I kept walking. You're just going to leave me here to die. My dad's going to bleed to death and it'll be your fault. Your fault, mister, your fault. The voice was still a child's voice. It was still the same voice. But there was something wrong with the emotion in it now. The shape of the anger was too adult, too calibrated, like a person doing an impression of a child's tantrum from memory. I passed a set of markers I recognized, about 400 yards from the next major trail junction. I felt sweat sliding down between my shoulder blades despite the cold. You know what happened to Thomas, the voice said. I stopped. I could not help it. I stopped in the middle of the trail with my hand on my radio, and my breath caught in my chest. You know what happened to him. He heard something like this. He came to help. And you know what he saw before he fell. You know. I made myself start walking again. I made myself keep walking. I'll tell you what he saw. Would you like to know what he saw? He saw. I turned my radio all the way up. I keyed it and asked base for a routine location check. The dispatcher, Gus again working late, read me the standard weather report just to have voices going in my ear. I asked him to keep the line open. He did. He didn't ask why. The voice kept up its running commentary for another 20 minutes. It described injuries. It described being cold. It described being scared of the dark. It described what a bad person I was. It described once in some detail what my mother had worn to my Ranger Academy graduation, which was not a fact anyone at White Pine had any business knowing. At some point around a mile in, as I passed a wide clearing where the trees pulled back and the sunlight fell full on the snow, the voice stopped mid-sentence. The forest, which had been silent the whole time, gradually remembered how to be a forest again. A raven called somewhere. Wind moved in the tops of the pines. Small things rustled in the underbrush. I finished the patrol. I got back to headquarters at a little before 5. I filed nothing that mentioned the voice. I described a routine loop with no incidents to report. That night I opened the journal. Rule 2. Never follow a voice that calls from off the trail. No matter what it says, no matter how young it sounds, no matter what it knows about you, they learn quickly. They listen for a long time before they speak. I underlined that one too. The following spring, I was assigned to the quarterly ecological survey on the eastern quadrant. Grid mapping. Tag the significant specimens, log their coordinates, photograph them from multiple angles, note age and condition. Dry, meticulous work. 2 full days of it, alone in the field, with a GPS unit and a clipboard and a bag full of aluminum tags. I had done this survey twice before. I knew the eastern quadrant as well as I knew any part of the park. White pine is a place where you learn the trees by their faces, the same way you learn people. On the second morning of the survey, I hiked in from the Rock Ledge trailhead and worked my way north along the grid. Around 11, I came into a small draw I recognized well. There was a burl on the trunk of a big ponderosa there that looked almost exactly like a bear's snout in profile. Iona had shown it to me once, years ago, and I always looked for it as a landmark. The burl was there. The ponderosa was there. Everything was where it should have been. Except that in the middle of the draw, at the exact bottom, there was a stone. It stood about 7 feet tall, rough gray granite, weathered on all sides with a lean to it that made it look as if it had been standing there for a very long time, and was tired of the effort. Lichen grew on it in orange and yellow patches. Moss furred the bottom. I had walked through that draw at least a dozen times over my 4 years in the park. There had never been a stone. I stood very still. My GPS unit was still in my hand. I looked down at it. I was in the right grid square. I was in exactly the place I thought I was. The stone was in the middle of the draw. There were no other stones like it anywhere in the visible landscape. No tumbled scree above the draw that could have shed it. No visible drag marks in the earth around its base. No disturbance of the moss and needle mat around it, as if the stone had grown up out of the ground, or had always been there, and I had somehow simply missed it every single time. I remembered Iona telling me once, over coffee at the equipment shed at the end of a shift, about a summer she had spent early in her career surveying the same quadrant. She had gone home for the winter and come back in the spring and found a boulder in her section that had not been there before. She had reported it to the district supervisor, who had told her, in a voice that had made her stop asking questions, to please make a note of it, and to please not go near it, and to please, if it moved again, please pretend she had not seen it move. White pine has old things in it, she'd said, stirring her coffee. Older than the park, older than the people who named it. Sometimes they wake up and change their positions. You do not go near a stone that has moved. You do not touch it. You do not walk in its shadow. You mark it on your map with a red circle, and you do not go back. I had laughed nervously and asked if she was pulling my leg. She had looked at me for a long second and gone back to stirring her coffee. I did not approach the stone. I took a photograph from where I stood at about 40 yards. The photo, when I looked at it later, would show a gray blur against the trees that could have been anything. A stone, a shadow, a fault in the film. Nothing that would hold up as evidence. Nothing that would convince anyone of anything. I turned around and hiked back the way I had come. I finished the Eastern Survey the following week by taking a longer route that swung wide around the draw. I filed a partial report. I claimed a GPS malfunction that had lost me the coordinates for grid squares 14 through 17. My district supervisor at the time was a man named Ellsworth, who read the report, gave me a very long look, signed off on it, and never brought it up again. I checked the draw once more, a year later, on a day when I had backup with me. The stone was gone. I have never returned to that draw. That night, back at my desk, I opened the journal. Rule 3. If something has moved that should not have moved, a stone, a tree, a cairn, a feature of the land, Do not investigate it. Note its position. Leave the area. Do not return alone. The curious ones do not come home. 3 rules. I had a feeling there would be more. Marcus Volk was my partner from my 5th year at White Pine until the summer of my 7th. Big man. 6'4", built like a mailbox, with a red beard and a laugh that made small children think of Santa Claus. He had come to the Park Service after 8 years in the Army as a medic. He was steady in ways that most rangers in my experience are not. He never rushed. He never panicked. He always went in. That last quality was what killed him. We had been assigned a search and rescue tasking on a warm July afternoon. A backpacker named Sarah Kessler had failed to check in at Ridgeline Camp 2 days earlier. Solo hiker. Experienced, well-equipped, the kind of person who does not usually go missing. We were on the 5th day of the search. Marcus and I had drawn the assignment to sweep the drainage that ran down toward Silver Lake, a long oval body of water tucked into the elbow of the northern ridge, black-green with depth, surrounded by a talus beach and a fringe of dead standing pines killed by a beetle kill from 3 years earlier. It was a beautiful place. It was also a place where I had never much liked to be alone. We came out of the tree line around 3 in the afternoon and stopped at the top of the talus slope to look down at the water. There was a figure on the far side of the lake, sitting on a flat rock at the edge of the water, holding what looked like a fishing rod. Marcus put his binoculars up first. He looked for a long time. "Silas," he said. I put mine up. It was a woman, sitting cross-legged on the rock, wearing a red flannel shirt over a gray t-shirt, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Even at that distance through the glass, I could see the shape of her face well enough to know she matched the photograph the Kessler family had provided. Sarah Kessler. Marcus's face did what I had seen it do 100 times in the 2 years we'd worked together. The tension of the search dropping out of his shoulders, the medic in him already moving to the next problem. Get to her. Assess her. Get her out. "Come on," he said, and started down the slope. I did not move. Something in me had gone very still, the way an animal goes still when a shape it does not like has just entered its field of vision. I raised my binoculars again. I studied her. She was holding the fishing rod, but she was not casting. The line hung slack from the tip and disappeared into the water without any tension in it. Her hands did not move. Her arms did not move. Her shoulders did not rise and fall. She was looking straight across the lake, but her head was turned at a slight angle to her shoulders. Not much, maybe 15 degrees, but enough to be uncomfortable if a human held it that way for very long. She was holding it. Perfectly. As if she had been that way for a long time, and would be that way for a longer time. The wind was moving down off the ridge in strong, gusty pushes. It moved the tops of the dead pines. It moved my hair. It moved Marcus's beard as he descended. It did not move a single strand of Sarah Kessler's hair. "Marcus," I said. I did not shout. My voice was flat. "Marcus, come back." He was already 30 yards down the slope. He turned and looked up at me with the polite impatience he wore when he thought I was being cautious about something that did not require caution. "What?" "Come back up, now." "Silas, we've been looking for her for 5 days." "That's not her." He looked at me the way you look at a partner who has just said something you're not sure you heard right. "What?" "That is not her. Look at her hair." He did. I saw him hesitate. I saw him bring the binoculars up again. The figure on the rock had turned its head. It had not turned like a person turns. It had rotated its head on the axis of its neck, 90 degrees toward us, without moving its shoulders or its body. It was now looking directly across the lake at us with its face perpendicular to the line of its collarbone. It smiled. Even at that distance I could see the mouth open. The smile went past where a mouth should end. Marcus took a step back, then another. He was starting to come back up the slope. He was doing exactly what I had asked him to. The figure stood up. I want to describe how it stood up. It did not push off the rock with its legs. It did not rise the way a human rises. Its body simply lifted, from cross-legged to standing, in one smooth motion, as if it had been pulled up from above on a very thin string. Then it began to walk across the surface of the lake. I mean this. It did not fall in. It walked across the top of the water, taking normal walking steps, its feet leaving no ripples behind them. It was coming toward us at a pace slightly faster than a human walk. Its arms hung loose at its sides. Its head was still perpendicular to its shoulders. It was still smiling. "Marcus, move. Move now. Do not stop." He was moving. He was moving fast up the slope, half running on the talus, his boots throwing up sprays of small stones. I was already backing up into the tree line, my rifle unslung. We carried rifles on that search, all of us, on Captain Reyes's standing order. The thing was halfway across the lake when Marcus's boot went between two loose stones and rolled his ankle. I heard the pop from 20 yards away. I saw him go down. I could describe the next 30 seconds in a great deal of detail. I have described them to myself in the dark more times than I care to admit. I will not describe them here. I will say only this. I ran to him. I got my arm under his and I pulled him up. He tried to stand on the ankle and he screamed and he could not put weight on it. I told him to lean on me. I told him we were going. I told him we would make it. I dragged him 10 yards, 15, 20, up the slope toward the trees. The thing came out of the water at the base of the talus. It was still walking. Its speed had not changed. I raised the rifle. I fired. I fired again. I fired 3 times into center mass at less than 80 yards. I am a good shot. The rounds went into it. They made no sound going in. They did not slow it down. They did not do anything at all. Marcus said very calmly, "Silas, go." I said no. He said, "Silas, you cannot carry me. You cannot carry me. Go." I said no. He took my hand off his shoulder. He put it down at my side. He looked me in the eyes, and he was the same man I had known for 2 years. Kind, steady, unafraid of things he ought to have been afraid of. He said, "Someone has to tell them what's here. Go." The thing was 30 yards away. I went. I ran into the tree line. I ran until the ground fell away in front of me into a small ravine, and I skidded down it on my back, and I lay at the bottom in the ferns with my hands over my mouth. I did not hear Marcus scream. I want to make that clear. I did not hear him scream. Whatever happened on that talus slope happened in near total silence, which was worse. I lay in the ravine for a long time. When I could stand, I hiked back to the truck. The whole way I did not put down my rifle. I radioed in from the truck because I could not have gotten a signal from the lake, and I would not have transmitted from there if I could have. I told Captain Reyes we had found Sarah Kessler. I told her Ranger Volk was dead. I told her we needed an armed team. 10 of us went back. We were all armed. It was the biggest response I had ever been part of in the park. Reyes led it herself, which she did not often do. The thing was gone. Marcus was there. What was there was Marcus mostly. 3 days later, a team out of a different search grid found the real Sarah Kessler under a cairn of rocks 4 miles east of Silver Lake. The medical examiner determined she had been dead for at least 8 days, which meant she had been dead for 3 days before I saw her sitting on a rock across the water with a fishing rod in her hands. We had a service for Marcus at the little chapel in the staff village. His wife came out from Kalispell. His 2 kids stood at the front of the chapel and did not cry, because they were still too young to know what was going on. I could not look at either of them. That night I sat at the desk and I opened the journal and I stared at it for a long time before I could write. When I did, my handwriting was not my own. Rule 4. If you find a missing person and something about them is not right, posture, motion, the way they breathe, the way the wind does not move their hair, do not approach, do not speak to them, radio it in, leave the area, leave, do not matter what you have been trained to do, leave. I sat there a long time after I put the pen down. Then I wrote in smaller letters, underneath, Marcus, I'm sorry. I never wrote his name in the journal again. I took 2 weeks of leave after Marcus. Reyes offered me a month. I turned it down. Sitting in my cabin was worse than being outside. Being outside meant that at least I was in motion. The park did not stop while I was on leave. Neither did whatever lived in it. I came back on a Thursday in early September, a cool gray morning with wet fog sitting in all the low places. I was assigned solo patrol along the North Rim, a long, gently climbing trail that ran up the shoulder of the ridge and eventually connected to the fire road at the top. Familiar ground. Nothing dramatic. Reyes was easing me back in. I had been out for maybe 3 hours when I heard her voice. Marrow, do you copy? Reyes's voice, coming from somewhere off the trail, to my right, maybe 80 yards down the slope in the direction of a small saddle between 2 rock outcrops. I stopped walking. Not from my radio, from the trees. Marrow, I'm hurt. I need you to come down here. I did not move. I did not answer. I unclipped my radio from my belt very slowly and very quietly, and I did not key it. The voice was Reyes's voice. It was exactly her voice. I had worked under Deborah Reyes for 4 years. I knew the specific gravel of her tone, the slight rural Oregon in her vowels, the way she cut the ends off her sentences when she was in a hurry. This was that voice. This was, phonetically, exactly her. Marrow, I know you're up there. I fell off the top of the outcrop. I think I broke my hip. I need you down here, right now. I stayed on the trail. I remembered very clearly a conversation I had heard between Iona and one of the other old-timers, a taciturn man named Denton Poole who had since retired. It had been near the end of a shift, and I had been in the next room overdoing paperwork. Iona had said quietly, "It's the voices you know that are the worst." Denton had grunted agreement. Iona had continued, "The first time you hear a friend calling you off the trail and it isn't your friend, that's when you understand what kind of place this is." I keyed my radio, my real radio, on the correct channel. "Base, this is Marrow. Location check on Captain Reyes, please." Static. Then Gus, who had by then been the day dispatcher for 3 years and knew my voice the way I knew Reyes's. "Stand by, Silas." The voice from the trees called out again. Marrow, please. I'm losing feeling in my leg. Come down." I did not move. "Marrow, this is Base. Captain Reyes is in a meeting at the regional office in Missoula. She's been there since yesterday afternoon. She won't be back until tomorrow." I did not take my eyes off the trees. "Copy that, Base. Please note the time. I'm hearing what sounds exactly like Captain Reyes calling for help from off-trail on the North Rim, about 80 yards below the second overlook. Please dispatch a 2-ranger team to my position, armed, and please do not send anyone alone. I will remain on the trail." There was a slightly longer pause than there should have been. "Copy, Silas. 2 team armed en route. ETA 35 minutes. Hold your position." Marrow. The voice from the trees had changed pitch. It was still Reyes, but something in the vowels had gone slightly flat, as if the effort of imitation was slipping. "Marrow, get down here right now. That is a direct order." I sat down on a fallen log at the edge of the trail. I put my rifle across my knees. I did not answer. The voice tried a number of things over the next 35 minutes. It ordered, it begged, it threatened disciplinary action. It described, in Reyes's voice, injuries it did not have. It called me by my first name. Reyes had never once in 4 years called me by my first name in the field. It reminded me at one point that Marcus would have come. At the mention of Marcus, I put my hands over my ears for a second. Just a second. Then I put them back down. The 2 team arrived at 32 minutes. It was Yolanda Chase and a rookie named Priya Ram, who had been at White Pine for 6 months. Both had their rifles unslung. Yolanda took one look at my face and did not ask questions. We stood together on the trail and listened. The voice had stopped the moment the 2 team came into view. There was nothing but wind in the pines. We swept the area in formation, 3 abreast, at a distance of no more than 5 yards between us. We did not find anyone. We did not find footprints. We did not find blood. We did find, on the trunk of a lodgepole about 100 yards off trail, 4 parallel gouges, each about 2 inches deep, running vertically down the bark. The gouges started at a height of roughly 11 feet. Priya was quiet for the whole hike back. On the truck ride back to headquarters, she asked me, in a small voice, whether I would tell her what had happened. I told her. I told her all of it, in the truck, with Yolanda driving and not interrupting. Priya was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Are you going to write this one down?" I looked at her sideways. "How do you know I write them down?" Iona told me before she retired last month. She said you were the one to talk to. She said you had a list. I did not know what to say to that. I looked out the window at the dark shapes of the trees. That night, I opened the journal. Rule 5. If you hear a familiar voice calling to you from off the trail, do not answer. Do not move. Radio base and confirm the person's location before you do anything else. They learn our voices. They will use the voice of anyone you love. They will use the voice of anyone you fear. The only defense is the radio. 5 rules. I underlined the last sentence twice. The 6th rule I learned on a night I have never quite been able to describe without my throat tightening. It was February of my 9th year. I had been asked to cover a night patrol on the Miller Basin Loop, a favor for a ranger named Elena Bergstrom, whose kid was sick. Winter night patrols are rare at White Pine. Most of them are only done in the summer when there are enough visitors to make the presence worth it. But there had been a run of vandalism at the winter shelters that month, and Reyes had authorized a 2-week overnight rotation to see if we could catch anyone. I set out at 10. It was clear, cold, moonless. My headlamp threw a cone of yellow light in front of me. My breath ghosted out white behind. The forest was silent in the particular way that only a deep winter forest can be silent. No insects, no bird song, no distant highway noise. Nothing at all except the small squeak of my boots in snow that had gone dry with cold. The crying started at around 11:30, about a mile into the loop. A woman, weeping, not calling out, not asking for help, just crying, quietly and steadily, from somewhere off the trail to my east. I stopped. I did not turn my head. My hand went to my radio. The crying did not stop or change when I stopped. It kept going at the same steady pitch, at the same steady volume, like a recording of a woman crying on a loop. I had been at White Pine long enough by then to know what this was. I had made my own peace with it, more or less. I began to walk again at the same steady pace, my breath ghosting in front of me, my eyes on the trail ahead. Silas. I did not stop this time, I did not slow, but I felt the skin at the back of my neck rise, because it was a voice I knew as well as I knew my own. It was my sister. My sister Annalisa died of an accidental overdose in her 2nd year of graduate school. She was 23. I had been at White Pine for 2 years at the time. I had gone home for the funeral. I'd come back 3 days later, because I could not stand being in my parents' house, and I had cried at the pine desk in my cabin for most of the first night I was back, and I had never spoken about her again to anyone in the Park Service. Silas, please. I kept walking. I did not stop. I did not slow. I did not answer. My eyes were wet, but I did not stop. Silas, why did you never come home? Silas, I've been trying to reach you. Why did you never come home? Annalisa's voice. Exactly her voice. The particular way she had said my name since we were children, with a small pause between the 2 syllables that no one else had ever imitated. I made myself keep walking. I made myself remember Marcus. I made myself remember Tomas. I made myself remember Warren Ashby standing in the sun without a shadow. Silas, they're keeping me here. Silas, you have to come get me. Silas. I passed a break in the trees on the east side, and I did not look through the break. I did not shine my headlamp through the break. I kept walking. "Silas." The voice began to change. The pitch stayed. The vowels stayed. But underneath the words there began to be another sound, low and wet, as if two voices were coming out of the same mouth. My sister's voice on top and a second voice underneath, deeper, arrhythmic, and not making words. It was the sound, if I try to describe it, of a very large mouth working underneath a smaller one. "Silas, please, Silas, come see me, Silas, Silas, Silas." Then the pretense dropped, and the voice was no longer my sister's, and no longer any human voice at all, and it was very close to the trail. I did not look at it. I kept walking. My hand was on my rifle by then. I did not raise the rifle. I did not run. I remembered Iona telling me once that running was the worst thing you could do, that it triggered something in them, the way running triggers something in a predator, and that the only defense was to keep walking, at the pace of a person on patrol, as if you had not seen a thing. I walked for what felt like a very long time. My headlamp made a small pool of yellow light around my feet. Somewhere around 2:30 in the morning, the crying and the other voice both stopped at the same time, mid-sound. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. I finished the loop at just past 4. I turned the truck on and I sat in the parking lot with the heater running, and I did not move for maybe half an hour. When the sky started to gray, I drove back out along the fire road until I found a rise where I had cell signal. I called my mother. It was 6 in the morning, her time. She answered on the 3rd ring. I did not tell her why I was calling. I told her I was thinking about Annalisa. I told her I was sorry I had not called her more in the years since. She did not ask why I was calling at 6 in the morning. She cried a little, and I cried a little, and we talked for maybe 20 minutes about nothing in particular. That night, I opened the journal. Rule 6. If you hear crying or the voice of someone you have lost, especially at night, do not look at it, do not speak to it, do not stop walking, do not run. The ones that use the dead are older and hungrier than the ones that use the missing. They will try harder. They will sound like the one person you would do anything to see again. Walk, pass through, go home and call someone alive. 6 rules. I looked at the page for a long time. I thought I was done. I was not done. There is a photograph on my wall of the 4 rookies I trained in my 13th year at White Pine. It is a group shot taken at the end of orientation week. They stand in a line in front of the ranger station in their fresh uniforms with their fresh badges and their fresh boots that they had not yet learned to break in properly. Left to right they are. Cal Whitfield, 28, former Coast Guard, wide grin. Nora Vance, 25, biology degree from the University of Idaho, serious dark eyes. Priya Ram, 30 by then, 6 years in the service, and one of the 2 people I had ever told the full story of Marcus to, and Elliot Hayes. Elliot Hayes was 23 years old. He had a cocky, easy handsomeness that I recognized from my own class, the kind of young man who has been told his whole life that he is going to be fine and has come to believe it. He had graduated top of his Ranger Academy cohort. He was very confident. He had a habit of finishing other people's sentences. I taught them, on the 2nd day of orientation, the rules. I did not tell them the stories that went with the rules. Not on the 2nd day. That would come later once I had a sense of which of them was capable of holding the weight and which of them was going to have to learn on their own. On the 2nd day I just gave them the rules cold, 6 of them, printed out on a single laminated card that they were each supposed to keep in the shoulder pocket of their uniform. Cal read his card and nodded slowly and put it away without comment. Nora read hers twice and then looked up at me and asked, "How many of these are for supernatural entities and how many are for people?" I looked at her a long time. "All of them are for both," I said. She nodded once. She put the card away. Priya, who already knew, did not need to read hers. Elliot glanced at his and laughed. "Come on," he said. "This is a joke, right? This is the veteran hazing the rookies. What are we supposed to think, that the woods are haunted?" "No," I said. You are supposed to think that the 6 rules on that card have kept me alive for 13 years, and that they will keep you alive if you follow them, and get you killed if you don't. That is what you are supposed to think." Elliot rolled his eyes. He did it in the way of a young man who has not yet been contradicted very much by the world. Cal, next to him, gave him a small elbow in the ribs, but Elliot laughed again and shrugged it off. I did not push. I had learned by then that pushing did nothing. Some of them believed you. Some of them did not believe you until they saw it. Some of them did not believe it even after. We did the standard orientation patrols for the first 2 weeks. Elliot performed well on the technical side of things. Good navigation, good first aid, good sense of pace. He was going to be, on paper, a very capable ranger. On the 16th day of orientation, I took the 4 of them on a long overnight, up through the Bishop's Notch trail system, camping at the designated ranger campsite at the head of the drainage. It was the last exercise of the orientation cycle. After that, they would be released to solo patrols. We were about 4 miles in on the second morning, hiking out on a section of trail that ran along a low bench above a wide meadow, when Cal, who was walking point, stopped and pointed. There was a family at the far edge of the meadow. Mother, father, 2 children, a boy of maybe 8 and a girl of maybe 5. They were standing in a loose group, looking up at the tree line. The parents were wearing summer hiking clothes. The children were wearing t-shirts and shorts. It was early June. There had been snow on the ground 3 weeks earlier. The temperature that morning was in the low 50s. Everyone in my team was wearing a fleece. The children were barefoot. "Hold up," I said quietly, and the 4 of them stopped behind me. I put my binoculars up. I studied the family for a long moment. They were standing perfectly still, all 4 of them, in the same posture. The mother's head was tilted at a slight angle. The father's head was tilted at exactly the same slight angle. The children's heads were tilted at exactly the same slight angle. I lowered the binoculars. "Rookies," I said. "That family down there is not a family. We are going to keep walking. We are going to stay on this trail. We are not going to look at them. We are not going to wave. We are not going to signal that we have seen them. We are going to walk past them. Anyone who deviates from this instruction will not be a ranger at White Pine at the end of this hike. Do you understand me?" Cal nodded. Nora nodded. Priya, who had by then been on solo patrols for years and had learned all of this the hard way, nodded. Elliot said, "Are you serious?" "Do you understand me?" I said again. "They're right there. They're a family with kids, in summer clothes. In the middle of the woods, they obviously need help. Elliot, do you understand me? You want to just walk past them? What if the kids are hypothermic? What if they are not children? Do you understand me? Look at the boy's feet. Look at the boy's feet, Elliot. He is standing on frozen dirt without shoes, and he is not moving. He is not shifting his weight. He is not crying. He is not doing any of the things a small boy in the woods without shoes would be doing. That is not a boy. That is a shape that has come here to be looked at. Do you understand me?" Elliot looked at me. There was something in his face that I had seen before, in my own face, from a long time ago. A young man being told for the first time that the world does not work the way he was told it worked. He did not understand me. I could see it in him. I did not have time to argue about it further. I said, "We are walking. We are walking now. Keep your heads forward. Keep pace with me. Do not look back down into the meadow." We walked. I set a good pace. I did not look at the family. I kept my eyes on the trail. I kept my breathing even. I could hear the boots of the 4 of them behind me. 4 sets. 4 sets. 4 sets. Then 3 sets. I turned. Elliot was 50 yards behind us. He had stopped on the trail and was looking down into the meadow with his hands cupped around his mouth as if he was about to call out to the family. He looked up and saw me looking at him. He raised one hand in a small, apologetic wave. Then he stepped off the trail. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next. I have been over it many times in my own memory and in the official report I filed afterward, and I want to describe only what I actually saw. I saw Elliot Hayes step off the trail onto the slope down into the meadow. I saw him take 3 or 4 steps down the slope, careful because it was steep and covered in loose scree. I saw the family at the far end of the meadow, 400 yards away, all turn their heads simultaneously to look at him. I saw the shape that had been the boy, the one without shoes, start walking across the meadow toward Elliot. It was not running. It was walking. It covered the 400 yards in perhaps 12 seconds. There is no honest way to describe those 12 seconds that does not sound like I am making them up. Its legs moved at a walking pace. The distance between it and Elliot shrank at a running pace. I do not know how to reconcile these two facts. I only know what I saw. I saw Elliot stop halfway down the slope. I saw him take 1 step back up. I saw him take a 2nd step back up. I did not see the 3rd step. I saw the shape that had been the boy arrive at the base of the slope. I saw it look up at Elliot. I saw Elliot look down at it. I saw Elliot's mouth open. The thing that had been the boy opened its mouth, and its mouth kept opening, and it did not stop opening, and Elliot stopped standing there. I do not have a better way to say it. I am sorry. There was a boy on the slope, and then there was a mouth at the base of the slope, and then there was no boy on the slope. That was what happened. I turned to Cal and Nora and Priya. I said, "We are running back to camp. We are running now. Do not look back. Do not stop until we are back at the trailhead." We ran. The search team went out at first light the next day. 12 rangers, 2 dogs, a helicopter for 2 of the days. They searched for a week. They found Elliot Hayes's boots, side by side, at the base of the slope where I had last seen him. They found nothing else. No blood, no clothing, no body, no tracks, just the boots. I sat with his mother in a small room at headquarters 2 weeks later, after the official inquiry. She was a very small woman with gray hair and Elliot's eyes. She asked me if her son had suffered. I said, "No, ma'am, it happened very fast. He would not have felt any pain." That was, in the strictest sense, true. That was the day I first thought seriously about retirement. That night I opened the journal. I did not add a new rule. I wrote at the bottom of the page under the 6th rule in small, careful letters, "Some of them will not listen. You cannot save the ones who will not listen. Save the ones who will." Then I closed the journal and put it in the drawer, and I did not open it again for a long time. I did not retire that year. I did not retire the year after that. It took me 2 more years to bring myself to say the words to Captain Reyes, and even then I said them badly, half mumbled at the end of a shift, and she looked at me a long moment and said, "About time, Silas," and hugged me, which she had never done in the 15 years I had known her. I had been at White Pine for 15 years. I had lost 1 partner and 1 rookie, and over the years, I had helped bury 6 other rangers who died in the park in ways the official reports were vague about. I had trained 31 rookies. 9 of them had left the Park Service in their first year. 2 had died. The rest were still out there somewhere, working other parks mostly. My last week was quiet in the way things get quiet before a storm. On the Thursday night before my last day, the veterans gathered in the equipment shed. Yolanda Chase and Priya Ram and Nora Vance and a few others. Someone had brought whiskey. Someone else had brought a cake with my name spelled correctly, which was rare and which had been the subject of some celebration at my formal retirement ceremony that afternoon. They asked me to tell the story of Marcus. I had never told the full story to more than 1 person at a time. I told it that night, in the equipment shed, with the 6 of them sitting on the workbench and the old cot and the folding chair we kept for visitors. I got through it without stopping. When I was done, Priya reached over and put her hand on my forearm and left it there for a moment, and no one said anything. And then Yolanda topped up my glass. "You know what you're going to do?" Nora asked after a while. "After?" I thought about it. I had not really thought about it, in a serious way, until that moment. "I have a sister who lives in Bellingham," I said. I have a sister I never see. I thought I might go see her." Nora nodded. She was 30 by then, 4 years into her service, and the best ranger I had ever trained, and had already been marked by Reyes as a future captain. She had asked me 6 months earlier if I would give her my journal when I left. I had said yes. I took the journal out of my jacket that night and gave it to her. She held it in both hands like it was something breakable. She opened it and looked at the first page. She looked at the second page. She looked at me. "Everything is in here? Everything I have. 6 rules, the stories that go with them. A map in the back with the places I do not go anymore marked in red. The stone in the draw? Marked. Silver Lake? Marked. The meadow? Marked." She closed the journal. She held it flat against her chest. "Silas," she said, "thank you." "Teach it," I said. "Teach the rules to every rookie, not just the ones you like, not just the ones who will listen, all of them, because you don't know which of them will be the ones it comes for." She nodded. I hugged the 6 of them, one at a time. I had not hugged any of them before, most of them in all the years we had worked together, and there was something strange and formal about doing it now. I walked back to my cabin under a clear sky full of stars. The next morning I packed my truck. 15 years of a life fit into fewer boxes than I would have imagined. I loaded the last box, closed the tailgate, and stood in the driveway for a long time looking at the cabin. I had one thing left to do. I had decided, that week, that I wanted to walk the North Rim one last time. Not for duty, not for any particular reason I could articulate. I just wanted to walk it. It was the trail I had been assigned my first solo patrol on, the trail where I had heard Reyes's voice come out of the pines, the trail I knew better than any other in the park. I put my uniform on for the last time and I set out on foot from the visitor center. It was a cold, bright morning, the kind that White Pine specializes in. Sun on the frost, blue sky over the ridges, the smell of pine sap warming in the sun. The trail crunched under my boots the way it always had. I walked slowly. I stopped often. I looked at things I had not looked at sometimes in years. The way the light fell through a particular gap in the trees, the shape of a boulder I had passed 1,000 times. The way the trail bent left at the top of a small rise before opening out onto the second overlook. At the second overlook, I stopped and looked out across the valley. I could see the whole northern half of the park from there. The dark line of Silver Lake in the far distance. The ridge above the meadow where Elliot had died. The distant gray haze of the cedar groves where I had first heard a boy's voice call my name. I stood there for a long time. I felt, more strongly than I had ever felt it, the sense of being watched. Not by a person, by a place, by everything at once. I had spent 15 years learning that this forest was a thing that paid attention, and I had spent 15 years telling myself I had made peace with that attention. Standing at the second overlook that morning, I understood that I had not made peace with it. I had only learned to live alongside it. Peace was a different thing, and it was not on offer here. I turned to walk back down the trail. There was a tree across the trail about 30 yards ahead of me that had not been there when I had walked up. It was a big ponderosa pine, thick through the trunk, at least 3 feet in diameter. It lay directly across the trail as if it had fallen naturally, its crown pointing downhill, its roots pointing up. The break at the base was clean, too clean, no jagged wood, no splinters. There was no disturbed earth around the roots, no shattered branches. No sign that a tree of that size had come down on the trail with the violence that a tree of that size falling should have produced. It had simply been placed there. I did not go around the tree. I stopped 15 yards away from it. I stood on the trail and I looked at it. "I know," I said out loud. My voice sounded very small in the trees. "I know. I'm going. I don't need the reminder." The tree did not respond, because it was a tree. But the wind, which had been moving in the tops of the pines all morning, went still. I turned around. I walked back the way I had come, the long way, adding maybe 2 miles to my route. I did not look back over my shoulder. I did not have to. I could feel the tree watching me the whole way down. I reached the parking lot at just past 11. I turned in my radio and my keys at the front desk. I shook hands with the desk clerk, a young man named Vernon who had started at White Pine the previous spring and did not yet know what he had signed up for. I did not tell him. Someone else would tell him, or he would find out on his own. Nora was waiting in the staff parking lot when I came out. She had the journal in her hand. She did not say anything. She just nodded once. I nodded back. I got in my truck. I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 11:07. The drive to Bellingham was 7 hours. I would be at my sister's house in time for dinner. I drove down the access road, past the maintenance shed, past the interpretive center, past the little chapel. The main gate came up on my right, a wooden arch built by the CCC in the 1930s, worn smooth by 90 years of weather. I slowed as I approached the arch. Habit. Thousands of entrances and exits over 15 years. I looked in the rearview mirror as I passed under it. They were standing in a line just inside the gate, along the shoulder of the road. I recognized every one of them. Marcus Volk was in front. He was in his ranger uniform. He was looking at me with an expression I could not read. Behind him was Elliot Hayes with his boots on, unmarked. Behind Elliot was Tomas Ibarra. Behind Tomas was a ranger named Rosa Delgado who had walked into the fog on the north face in her second year and never come out. Behind Rosa were 4 or 5 others, some of whom I recognized only from photographs in the memorial hall. None of them moved. None of them waved. None of them opened their mouths. They just stood there in a line along the road watching me leave. I gripped the wheel harder. My knuckles went white. I knew they were not real. I had learned over 15 years exactly what this was. It was the last attempt. It was the park's final effort to make me turn around, to make me pull over, to make me get out of the truck and walk back across the boundary to see them one more time. There was no 7th rule in the journal. I had never written one, but I had thought it many times in the years since Elliot. When you leave, do not look back. Do not stop. Do not return. I put my eyes on the road. I put my foot on the gas. I drove. In the mirror, the line of rangers stood where they had been, and I watched them shrink and finally slip out of sight as the road bent around the shoulder of the ridge. Somewhere behind me, on a trail I had walked 1,000 times, a tree that should not have been there lay across the path. Somewhere behind me, in a draw I had marked in red on a map, a stone might or might not be standing. Somewhere behind me, at the edge of a lake I would never see again, a shape was waiting patiently for the next well-meaning ranger to come down the slope. I drove. The sun came up higher over the ridges. The road unspooled in front of me. The gas gauge dropped a quarter. The needle on the temperature climbed toward normal. At the county line, I pulled over into a wide gravel turnout that overlooked the last view of the park. I got out of the truck. I stood there for a while in the cold air. I did not cry, because I had done my crying at other times, in other places, mostly alone. I said out loud to no one. I did what I could. Then I got back in the truck. I turned on the radio to a country station out of Missoula. I drove west. Nora Vance made captain 2 years later. She wrote to me at Christmas that year. She said the journal was still working. She said she had trained 6 new rookies and taught them all 6 rules, and that the rookies had listened, mostly, and that no one had died on her patrol yet. She said she had added a 7th rule at the bottom of the page under mine. Rule 7. When you leave, do not look back. Do not stop. Do not return. The park remembers everyone who crosses its lines, and it will wait. She said she thought I would approve. I wrote back that I did. I have not been back to White Pine Ridge. I do not think I will be back to White Pine Ridge. My sister lives 20 minutes from a small city park with a duck pond in it, and I walk through it most mornings, and the paths are paved and the ducks are loud, and no shape without a shadow has ever stopped me on the trail. I still keep my old radio on the shelf above my desk. I have never turned it on. I could not tell you why I have kept it. My sister asked me once when she was helping me move in, and I found that I did not have an answer for her, and she did not press. Sometimes at night, when the house is very quiet and my sister's dog is asleep on the rug and the streetlight outside the window is throwing its familiar orange square across the floor, I look up at the radio on the shelf and I think about all the voices it carried, and all the voices it never carried, and all the voices that came out of the trees on the other side of it. I think about how many of those voices are still out there, waiting patiently for someone to answer. Then I go to bed, and I sleep the sleep of a man who has survived what he was supposed to survive. And I dream, sometimes, of a line of rangers standing along the road inside the gate at White Pine, watching me leave. They are always still there when I wake up. They are always still there. S. Marrow, Bellingham, Washington, 16 years out. The Forest Service truck struggled up the last 3 miles of Switchback Road, its transmission whining every time we hit another grade. I gripped the door handle and watched the drop-off inch past my window, 2,000 feet of nothing but pines and rock. The driver, a man named Ted who hadn't said more than 10 words the whole trip up from Wenatchee, kept his eyes on the road and both hands on the wheel. "How much further?" I asked. 10 minutes, he said. Maybe 15 if the ice is bad on the last stretch. It was late September, the kind of high country day when the light comes down clear and gold and you can see for 100 miles. I'd been staring at the North Cascades since we left the interstate, watching them get bigger and closer and stranger. I'd spent 5 summers as a wildland firefighter in Idaho, and I thought I knew mountains. These were different, older, sharper. They didn't feel like the sawtooths or the bitterroots. They felt like they were paying attention. Ted downshifted, and the truck lurched into another switchback. My duffel bag slid across the back seat and thumped against the door. "You ever work a lookout before?" he asked. It was the most he'd said in one breath since we left town. "No. First one." He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd already guessed. "Marcus'll get you sorted." "Marcus Hale? Station coordinator. Been up here longer than anyone." He paused for a long moment, then said, "You're going to want to listen to him." I was planning on it. "No." Ted glanced at me for the first time since he'd loaded my gear at the ranger station. His eyes were pale gray, deep-set, and I got the sudden feeling I was being appraised. "I mean, listen to him. About the card, don't argue, don't laugh. Just do what he says exactly the way he says it." Then he turned back to the road and didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. The base station wasn't much to look at. A single-story wooden building squatting on a leveled clearing, painted the same faded green as every Forest Service building I'd ever seen. A garage, a propane tank, a radio antenna bristling from the roof. Behind it, the ground rose another 800 feet to Devil's Peak itself, and there, at the very top, I could just make out the lookout tower, a small square cabin on stilts, glass walls catching the afternoon sun, and throwing it back at me like a signal mirror. That was going to be my home for the next 6 months. Ted parked next to a battered blue pickup and killed the engine. "Grab your bag. Marcus is inside." I climbed out into air so thin and cold it hit me like plunging into a lake. My lungs weren't ready for the altitude yet. I stood there for a second, breathing carefully, taking in the smell of pine sap and wood smoke and the sharper edge of the coming winter. The wind pushed my hair across my face and the trees behind the station made a sound like a slow ocean. Ted was already walking toward the door. I grabbed my duffel and followed. The inside of the station was almost too warm after the cold. A wood stove crackled in the corner. The walls were paneled in dark tongue and groove that had probably been there since the 60s. Topo maps covered every free surface, some of them yellowed and curling at the corners. A tall man was standing at a table by the window, hunched over what looked like a stack of weather logs. He looked up when the door closed behind us. "You must be Mercer." "Sarah. Yeah. Marcus Hale." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and offered his hand. He was maybe 60, tall enough that I had to tilt my head to meet his eyes, with the kind of face that had been sanded by weather until only the essentials remained. Deep lines around the eyes, gray beard trimmed short, a quiet, careful stillness that made me think of the fire captains I'd worked under in Idaho, the ones who'd been doing it long enough to know that panic was the enemy of survival. His grip was dry and firm. He looked me over the way Ted had, not rudely but thoroughly, like he was checking off boxes on a list I couldn't see. How was the drive? Long. Beautiful. It'll get shorter and less beautiful once you've done it a few times. He let go of my hand and gestured at a chair by the wood stove. Sit. You want coffee? Please. He filled a chipped white mug from the pot on the stove and handed it to me. It was the color of used motor oil and smelled about as friendly, but it was hot and I was grateful for it. Ted disappeared through a door in the back without a word. I heard boots on stairs, a door shutting somewhere upstairs. Marcus sat down across from me and folded his hands between his knees. So, he said, before we do the boring stuff, HR paperwork, the tour, radio protocols, I need to walk you through the rules. The Forest Service rules? The Devil's Peak rules. He said it in the same flat, ordinary voice he'd said everything else, and I couldn't tell if I was supposed to laugh or not. I settled for a small smile that could go either direction. He didn't smile back. He reached behind him to a shelf, pulled down a manila folder and slid out a laminated card. It was maybe 4 inches by 6, thick from being handled a lot with rounded corners that were worn white where a thumb had gripped them 1,000 times. He held it out. Read it. I set the coffee down and took the card. Black text on white, 4 lines, numbered. 1. Never touch anything found on the observation deck or the stairs with bare hands. Use the metal tongs mounted by the door. Deposit all found items directly into the burn barrel. Do not examine them. 2. Check the mercury barometer on the west wall every hour on the hour. If the needle stays fixed on storm for more than 3 minutes while the sky is clear, go directly to the root cellar under the base station and remain there for exactly 90 minutes. Do not exit early for any reason. 3. If you hear a woman calling for help from the direction of Silver Creek, do not answer, do not radio for assistance, and do not investigate. Ring the brass bell mounted outside the tower door exactly 12 times, then lock yourself inside. Do not open the door until sunrise, regardless of what you hear. 4. Never turn on the observation lights between 2:47 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. under any circumstances. If you see movement on the ridges during that window, do not illuminate it. Whatever you shine a light on will remember you. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Marcus. He was watching me with the same patient, unreadable expression, waiting. I had the strong sense that he had done this many times, and that everything he was going to do next depended on what I said now. Is this a joke? I asked. It came out more careful than I intended. Do I look like I'm joking? No. Then don't ask again. I looked at the card. I looked at him. I felt suddenly, absurdly, aware of the way the light was falling across the room, the tick of the wood stove, the wind against the windows. I had come 900 miles for this job. I had a signed contract in my duffel bag. I had rent to pay on an apartment in Boise. And a man I had just met was telling me, with a face like carved rock, that a mercury barometer would predict something bad happening in the sky, and that I was going to shoot the ringer of a brass bell 12 times to make a woman's voice go away. Marcus, I said, I need to understand what you're actually telling me. I know you do. That's why I'm going to show you the wall. He stood up. I stood up. He led me across the room to a door I hadn't paid attention to, plain, unmarked, closed with a simple hook latch. He lifted the hook and pushed it open. The room beyond had been the station's original mudroom, back when this had all been WPA construction in the 30s. Coats hung from pegs, boots lined up under a bench, a couple of old snowshoes leaning in the corner, and on the wall opposite the door, in 3 neat rows, were 16 photographs, employee photos. all in uniform, all smiling that half-smile people give when they've been told to smile for the badge camera. 16 faces arranged like a memorial. I felt something shift in my chest. "Come here," Marcus said. He pointed to the top left. "Danny Alvarez, started here in 2004. Good kid, good ranger. Went home to his family in Yakima every fall for 18 years. Retired in 2022. He's alive. He calls me on my birthday." He moved his finger to the next photo. Older man, thick mustache, tired eyes. "Bill Kettering. Look out here from 96 to 2011, made it out. Runs a bait shop in Idaho now." Then his finger stopped and hovered over the next photo. A woman in her 30s. Dark hair, high cheekbones, serious smile. "Yolanda Marsh. She was my second-year hire back when I was still relatively new at this myself, 15 years ago." He tapped the photo lightly once. "She thought Rule 3 was a hazing prank. Heard the voice from Silver Creek. Radioed base for a wellness check on a possible hiker in distress." "What happened?" "We found her radio and her jacket on the trail down to the creek. Everything else was gone. No blood, no footprints past a certain point, no body." He kept his eyes on the photograph. "We searched for 11 weeks. I didn't say anything." He moved to the next photo, then the next. He didn't rush. He named each person and said one true thing about them: a kid brother, a college major, a favorite fishing spot, and then he said either made it out or he said what happened. Mike Doyle, Rule 4, saw something on the North Ridge, wanted to know what it was, turned on the beam. 2 weeks later, he stopped sleeping. 4 months later, he stopped talking. He's in a state facility in Spokane, doesn't recognize his wife. Ann Robeson, Rule 1, picked up a hunting knife she found on the observation deck stairs. Beautiful old knife, bone handle, hand-forged. She was going to turn it in at the ranger station. We found her the next morning in her bed at the base station. No visible injuries, blood pressure of 0, just gone. The knife was gone too. Elias Park, Rule 2, ignored the barometer during his first week. Thought it was a broken instrument. We found him 3 days later at the bottom of the ravine below the tower. Autopsy said fell from height, but he was found 2 miles from the tower and no one knows how he got there. He kept going. 16 photographs. 9 had a story like Yolanda's, or Ann's, or Elias's. 7 had gone home. When he finished, he stood back and looked at me. I was still holding the laminated card. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I am not asking you to believe in ghosts. I am not asking you to believe in anything. I have worked this station for 31 years, and I have watched 13 people disappear from a job that had 32 total positions in that time. That is not a statistical fluke. That is a pattern. And the 4 rules on that card are the pattern of survival that we have figured out through the worst kind of trial and error. Do I know why they work? No. Do I know that they work? Yes. Absolutely yes." I looked back at the wall. "If you can't do this," he said, "if you look at those photos and you think this is a game or a story, then I need you to tell me right now. I have a truck going back down the mountain in 2 hours. You can be on it. Your paycheck will process either way. No hard feelings." I thought about it for a long minute. Long enough that he started to look away like he had made up his mind about what I was going to say. "I want to stay," I said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Then say the rules back to me." I did. I read them off the card. Then I put the card face down on the table and said them again from memory. He made me do it 3 times. "Good," he said finally. "You'll get quicker with it. Some things you're going to have to feel in your bones before you'll really understand them. But we'll drill it until then." He put the card in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "That's yours now. Keep it on you. Not in your pack. On you. Shirt pocket during the day, next to your bed at night. If you ever wake up and can't remember where it is, that's the first thing you look for. Understood? Now let me show you the tower." The trail from the base station to the lookout was 1.25 miles of switchbacks, cutting up through subalpine fir and old avalanche scars. Marcus set an unhurried pace and I followed, still catching my breath in the thin air, watching the light lengthen across the slopes. We stopped twice on the way up so he could point things out. That's Silver Creek. He gestured down through the trees to my left. I couldn't see the water, but I could hear it, a distant, steady rush that would have been comforting anywhere else. Voice comes from about a mile downstream, at the elbow where the creek bends around the rockfall. Never anywhere else. If you ever hear someone calling from upslope of you, that's a real person and you handle it like normal. If it's from downstream that direction, he pointed, it's not. I nodded and made myself memorize the direction. We climbed on. About halfway up we came out onto a small level bench where the trees thinned and I could see the whole southern range spread out below us. It was so beautiful I forgot to be scared for a minute. That's the burn scar. Marcus was pointing at a wide swath of blackened trees 3 ridges south. Big fire 2017. We got called down for spotter duty. Almost lost the tower that summer. Wind changed twice on us. Ever fought fire like that? Idaho mostly. Nothing that big. Big is different. Big is a thing that thinks. I looked at him sideways to see if he was joking. He wasn't. We kept climbing. The tower itself was smaller than I'd pictured from the base station. A 14 by 14 wood cabin sitting on top of 8-foot pilings with a catwalk running around it and a metal staircase climbing up to the trapdoor in the floor. The whole thing was painted the same weathered green as the base station. Storm shutters were folded back against the outside walls. Marcus led me up the stairs. The metal treads clanged under his boots. Watch the second step from the top, he said. It's loose. I've been meaning to fix it for 4 years. At the top of the stairs, he unlocked a padlock and pushed up the trapdoor. He climbed in and I followed. The inside of the lookout was a marvel of efficient use of space. A cot along one wall with drawers underneath. A small propane stove and sink. A wood-burning heater in the corner. A folding table. Bookshelves crammed with weather logs and field guides and yellowed paperbacks. And in the center of the room, the Osborne firefinder. A big round map on a rotating pedestal with a sighting device across the top. Unchanged in design since 1911. The walls were mostly glass. The view from up here made the view from the bench halfway up look small. I could see for what had to be 100 miles in every direction. Ridge after ridge of dark timber, snowfields glittering white, the twist of Silver Creek far below, a couple of lakes like pieces of dropped mirror. My God, I said quietly. Yeah, Marcus said. That never goes away. He walked me through the essentials. Radio here, spare batteries here, fire finder, and here are the standing bearings for the known landmarks. Weather station outside, gauges you check twice a day and record in the log. Coffee pot, tea, propane refill schedule. Bear spray on the wall. You probably won't need it up here, but there's a couple that come up in July for the huckleberries. Toilet is the outhouse 30 yards down the north catwalk, don't fall in. Then he stopped in front of the west wall and pointed. And that's the barometer. It was old. Beautiful, actually, in a strange way. Solid brass housing, mercury column behind glass, a small brass needle floating over a labeled dial that read, in order around the arc, rain, change, fair, very dry, and, pushed off to one side, at the extreme edge of the arc where a normal instrument wouldn't have anything at all, storm. The storm position was almost horizontal. To reach it, the needle would have to swing nearly a quarter turn from where it currently sat between fair and very dry. Every hour on the hour, Marcus said. You write down the reading. If the needle jumps to storm and stays there for 3 minutes on a clear day, you go to the root cellar. Do not stop for anything. Not the logbook, not the radio, not your jacket. Do not close the trapdoor. You run down the stairs, down the trail, and you get in the root cellar and you close the hatch and you set your watch for 90 minutes. What's in the root cellar? Concrete walls, iron door, a couple of shelves of canned food, and a chemical toilet. Nothing else. Nothing needs to be there. What's coming when the needle moves? I don't know. I've been in the root cellar 7 times in 31 years. 6 of those times, I heard something walking around outside the cellar door for the whole 90 minutes. Once I heard something trying the handle. It never got in. I'm still here. He looked at the barometer for a long moment, then at me. The first time I timed it, I was younger. Wanted to see if it was really 90 minutes or if you could safely leave at, say, 70. So I sat with a stopwatch, and at 78 minutes on the nose, the noise outside stopped. Total silence, not even wind. And I got up to open the hatch, and I don't know how to explain this. I felt the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Just standing there with my hand on the latch. Like something in the air was watching me decide. So I sat back down and waited the full 90. When I finally opened the door, everything was normal. Sun was out, birds were singing. Nothing there. But I've never gone out early since, and I never will. Understood. Say the rule back. Check the barometer every hour on the hour. If storm for 3 minutes with clear sky, root cellar 90 minutes, don't come out early for anything. Good. He walked me around the rest of the tower and pointed out the specific things the card referenced. The metal tongs mounted next to the door with a bracket, exactly where you couldn't miss them. A stack of thick leather gloves in a drawer for the times when tongs weren't enough. A brass bell, the size of a coffee can, hanging outside the door on a hook, with a knotted cord for the clapper. When you ring the bell, ring it deliberately. 12 clear strikes. Count out loud if you have to. If you get to 7 and lose count, start over from 1. Don't stop in the middle. Why 12? I don't know. 12 is what works. Someone figured it out before my time. There's a note in an old logbook from '78 that just says 12 rings always. That's all I've got. Finally, he showed me the light. The observation lamp mounted on the south catwalk, a big sealed beam spotlight on a swiveling mount, wired into the tower's main power and controlled by a single toggle switch by the trapdoor. You're going to want to use this, he said, in your first month especially. Something moves out there at night and every instinct in you is going to say illuminate it. You need to override that instinct completely between 2:47 and 3:33 a.m. I have a wristwatch that beeps at both times. I'll give it to you. Wear it every night. What did Mike Doyle see? Marcus was quiet for a long time. He said afterward, before he stopped talking, that it was a person but the wrong shape, standing very still on the ridge. He said when he turned the light on it, it bent. That was the word he kept using, bent. And then it looked at him. He said its face was correct. Its face was correct? That was what he kept saying. Its face was correct. He said it a lot. I don't know what he meant. He turned off the switch again, though it was already off, and looked at me carefully. Do not illuminate anything in that window. Ever. Not even for a second to check. Not to help a lost hiker. Not to spot a fire. Nothing. Whatever you turn that light on between 2:47 and 3:33 sees you back and it remembers. And you don't want to be remembered. Understood. Say the rule. Never turn on the observation lights between 2:47 and 3:33 a.m. under any circumstances. If I see movement, don't illuminate it. Whatever I shine a light on will remember me. Good. He looked at the western horizon, where the sun was starting to slide toward a bank of clouds. You've got about 2 hours of daylight left. I'm going to leave you now. First shift is orientation only. You don't need to do a real spotter watch tonight. Get settled in, cook yourself dinner, familiarize yourself with the radio. I'll be on my regular channel until midnight. After that, unless it's an emergency, I sleep. Okay. Rule 3 about the bell, 12 rings. Rule 4 about the light. Never in that window. Rule 2, root cellar for 90 minutes. Rule 1, the tongs. Say them one more time. I said them one more time. He climbed down through the trap door. Halfway down the stairs, he stopped and looked back up at me. Sarah. Yeah. I'm glad you took the job. You've got the right kind of face for it. What kind is that? Scared enough? Then he was gone, boots ringing on the metal stairs, and I was alone in the sky. I stood by the west windows for a long time, watching the light change. The sun sank toward the ridge and everything below me turned gold, then rose, then the deep blue you only see at altitude. A single hawk crossed my field of view moving south. I could see 3 separate weather systems from where I stood. A snow squall over the pickets to the north, clear sky to the west, and a bank of high cirrus rolling in from the southwest. The card was in my shirt pocket. I could feel it against my chest. When it got too dark to see the peaks, I closed the shutters. Marcus had shown me the ropes and pulleys that let you lower them without leaving the deck, and lit the propane lantern. I cooked myself a can of chili on the stove and ate it standing at the window, watching the last color fade out of the sky. Below me, the base station was a warm yellow dot in a black sea of trees. Above me, stars were starting to come out. I checked the barometer on the hour. Needle was between fair and change. I logged it. I checked it again at the next hour. Same reading. I logged that too. Around 10 o'clock, I climbed into the cot with a paperback I'd brought from home and read for a while. The wood heater ticked as it cooled. Wind moved against the shutters. Once, something creaked on the catwalk outside. Probably nothing. Probably the temperature dropping and the board settling. But I lay very still for a long time and listened before I went back to my book. I didn't hear it again. Just before midnight, I turned off the lantern and lay in the dark and waited for sleep. It came slowly. My hand kept drifting to my shirt pocket to feel the card. At some point I fell asleep. I didn't hear anything strange for the first 11 days. I got into a rhythm. Wake up at 5:30. Coffee. 15 minutes of stretches on the catwalk while the sun came up. Radio check with base at 6 sharp. First fire watch from 6 to 9, scanning the horizon slowly and methodically in 10-degree sweeps. Breakfast, weather log at 9. Second watch until noon, lunch. Third watch until 3. A break for chores, hauling water, splitting kindling, checking the propane, cleaning the firefinder glass. Fourth watch until sunset. Then dinner, logbook, personal time, sleep. The barometer got checked every hour on the hour. Needle stayed pinned between fair and change for the first 3 days, then drifted toward rain when a front came through, then back. I logged every reading. Nothing walked on the catwalk. Nothing called from Silver Creek. Nothing moved on any ridge between 2:47 and 3:33 a.m. because I was asleep and the light was off. On day 4, I picked up a candy bar wrapper from the observation deck stairs without thinking, then stopped halfway to the trash bin, my whole body going cold. I stood there for a full 10 seconds with the wrapper in my bare hand, waiting for something. Nothing happened. I dropped it in the burn barrel and washed my hands 3 times. I told Marcus on the next day's radio check. He was silent for a long moment. Was there anything else on the stairs? Anything you didn't touch? No, just the wrapper. Then you might be all right. But use the tongs from now on. I mean it. Every time. If it's your own wrapper that blew out of your pocket, use the tongs. If it's a dead leaf that shouldn't matter, use the tongs. If you're dropped a coin and want to pick it up, use the tongs. Get so used to using the tongs that you can't remember what it feels like not to. Understood. I mean it, Sarah. I got it. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just be careful. That's how it starts. One little thing, one exception, one this doesn't count. That's exactly how it starts. I used the tongs after that. For everything. My own pens if I dropped one. Twigs that blew onto the catwalk. Once, a hummingbird that had flown into the north window and stunned itself. I picked it up with gloved hands actually, since the tongs would have hurt it, and I set it on the railing where it eventually shook itself and flew away. Marcus said gloves were fine for anything alive. On day 11, at 3:14 in the morning, I woke up. I don't know why I woke up. There wasn't a sound that I could remember. But my eyes were open, and I was staring at the plank ceiling, and I knew The way you know things in dreams. That there was something on the catwalk. I lay very still. The wind was doing its usual thing, sighing against the shutters, occasionally banging one of the loose latches. There was no other sound, no footstep, nothing to justify what I was feeling. But I felt it, on the south catwalk, standing exactly at the top of the stairs where the toggle switch for the observation light was mounted. I could feel it there like a warm spot in a swimming pool. Every part of me wanted to turn on the light, not to look at what was out there. That was the horrifying thing. I didn't want to see it. I wanted to chase it away. I wanted to prove to myself that there wasn't anything there and go back to sleep. And the light switch was right there, 12 feet from my cot. All I had to do was reach out. The watch on my wrist beeped. I nearly cried out. I clamped my hand over my mouth and lay there with my heart trying to punch its way through my ribs. It was Marcus's watch, the one he'd given me my second day, and it beeped once at 2:47 and again at 3:33. This was the second beep, 3:33 a.m. I was clear. I lay there for another 20 minutes with my hand on the card in my pocket, listening. The feeling on the catwalk went away sometime around 3:45. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. I did not sleep again that night. In the morning, I radioed Marcus and told him. My voice sounded very normal on the radio, which surprised me. He said, "Was it on the south side?" "Yes." "Did you check the light switch after sunrise? Sometimes it looks like it's been touched." I hadn't. I told him I would. I checked it when I got off the morning watch. The toggle was exactly as I'd left it, down in the off position. But there was a smudge on the metal cover plate around it. A dark smudge, like a fingerprint made by a finger that had been dipped in something. Not oil. Not dirt. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put on the leather gloves and wiped the smudge off with an alcohol pad, and I burned the pad in the barrel. I did not radio Marcus about the smudge. I don't know why I didn't. I think I was afraid he would take me off the mountain, and I did not want to leave. That is the thing that surprised me, then and later. I did not want to leave. The first partner I lost was not a partner in the strict sense. His name was Andy Trotter. He was a research biologist from the University of Washington doing owl surveys in the sector, and he had a temporary bunk assignment at the base station for a 9-week window in late September and October. I met him twice, once at the base station when he came up to hand off gear, and once when he hiked to the tower for coffee because he was curious about the firefinder. He was maybe 40, wire rim glasses, a doctorate, kind of a delighted professorial way about him, like every conversation was the first time he'd been asked what he thought about something. He didn't know the rules. He wasn't supposed to need them. He was based at the station, he did his work during the day, and he was back at base by dark every night. Then on a Thursday afternoon in early October, he came up to the tower to say hi and stayed later than he should have. We'd gotten to talking about migration routes, and I'd shown him the firefinder, and the light had started to slide down, and I was about to say you should head out before dark, when I looked at my watch and realized it was already dusk, and he had 80 minutes of hard walking down a trail he barely knew. "You can stay here tonight," I said. "We've got a spare bag. I'll radio Marcus." He laughed. "Sarah, I can do 1.5 miles in the dark. I've got a headlamp. It's not going to kill me." I did not have a good reason to insist. He didn't know about the rules, and I couldn't figure out how to bring them up without sounding insane. So I said okay, and I gave him a spare granola bar, and I watched him from the catwalk as he headed down the trail with his little cone of headlamp light bobbing through the trees. I never saw him again. Marcus radioed me at 8 the next morning. Andy hadn't come back to the base station. His bed was empty and his kit was still there. We searched for 4 days. Search and rescue. Dogs. A helicopter from Chilean. We found his headlamp about halfway down the trail, still on. The batteries had run down by the time we got there, but the switch was flipped to on. 20 feet from the headlamp, off the trail, we found one of his boots, standing upright in the pine duff, perfectly, like he had been lifted straight up out of it. They never found anything else. The official report said presumed fatal misadventure, remains not recovered. Marcus and I filled it out together at the base station one evening in October, and neither of us said the obvious thing, which was that Andy had probably heard something calling from the direction of Silver Creek, and that being a scientist and a curious man and a kind human being, he had probably done the natural, decent thing. Marcus finished the report and slid it across the table to me for my signature. I signed it. He said, "This is what I meant, you know, about the rules." I know. He didn't know them. He couldn't have known them. But that doesn't matter. The rules apply to everyone up here, whether they know about them or not. I should have made him stay. Yeah, you should have. He didn't say it cruelly. He said it the way a math teacher tells you your answer is wrong. It was a piece of information. Next time, he said, if it comes down to sounding crazy or letting somebody walk into it, sound crazy. Every time. I said okay. Then I went outside and stood in the cold and cried for a while. Not for long. When I came back in, Marcus was making coffee, and the report was in an envelope on the table with Andy's name typed on the front. "Get some sleep," he said. "You've got a shift tomorrow." I know. The mountain doesn't stop, Sarah. That's the other thing you're going to have to learn. Bad things happen and the fire watch still needs to be run. Don't let yourself think you can grieve and do the job at the same time. Grieve on your days off. That sounds harsh. It is. But if you try to grieve on the tower, you'll break a rule. I have thought about that a lot in the years since. He was right. I stayed through my first winter. Marcus had told me during my hiring interview that Devil's Peak was one of the few towers in the Cascades that was staffed year-round, and that most rangers did a 6-month rotation because a full winter alone at that altitude was more than most people could handle. He'd asked if I wanted the winter shift or if I wanted to trade off with a summer-only person. I picked winter. I don't know why. I think I wanted to see what the mountain was like when everyone else had gone home. Winter at Devil's Peak is the closest thing I have ever experienced to being on another planet. The days shrink to 8 hours of pale light, and even those hours don't feel warm. Snow piles halfway up the tower's pilings, and I had to shovel the stairs every 3 days or lose them. The wind sometimes came in gusts of over 100 miles an hour, and the whole tower shook like it was going to lift off. I learned to sleep through that. The other lookouts came off the network one by one as their seasons ended. Wallace closed down Copper in late October. Elena at Sourdough followed a week later. Fitz stayed at Deer Point until mid-November, and then he too was gone. By December, my only radio contact was Marcus at base in the district office in Wenatchee. Marcus stayed at the base station until December, then rotated down to town for the deep winter months. From January through March, I was the only human being for 20 miles in any direction. My mail came up on a snowmobile every 3 weeks with a supply drop. Otherwise, I was alone. The rules got easier during the winter. Nothing came up the trail because nothing could. The snow was too deep. The barometer sat quietly at change most days. Silver Creek froze over and the voice couldn't come from it because it couldn't come from anywhere else, apparently. But Rule 4 still had to be followed, and Rule 4 was the hardest of the 4 in winter because the winter nights were 16 hours long, and there was nothing to do but listen. Once, in mid-February, I heard something scream on the ridge to the south. It was 3:08 in the morning. I was awake because I was almost always awake in the small hours by then. You get to a rhythm where you drop off at 8 and wake at 3 and just don't fight it anymore. I was sitting up in my sleeping bag drinking cocoa when I heard it. It was not any animal. I want to be clear about that. I have heard cougars, and I have heard elk and rut, and I have heard bears fighting, and I have heard the sound a hare makes when a fox catches it. This was not any of those things. This was a sound in the shape of a human word, but stretched out and repeated and pitched slightly wrong, like a person imitating a language they didn't speak. It said help, and it said it 7 times. Except it wasn't calling for help. That was the thing that got to me. If you stripped away the horror of the sound itself and just listened to it, it wasn't in the tone of someone asking for help. It was in the tone of someone testing a phrase to see if it worked. Practicing. I did not turn on the light. I sat on the cot, and I held the card in my hand, and I stared at the switch, and I did not turn on the light. My watch beeped at 3:33. The screaming had stopped a few minutes before that. The wind picked up. Whatever it was moved on. I logged the incident in the morning. Marcus read it a day later when he came back to the base station to pick up his mail, and he radioed me and asked me to say the rules back. I said them back. "Good," he said. "You're a real ranger now. How do you tell? You're not scared enough to leave, and you're not curious enough to break a rule. That's the sweet spot. You'll stay there for the rest of your career if you stay." I'm going to stay. I figured. I stayed. 6 years now, then 8, then 12. The mountain became the shape of my life. I lost people. I lost Marcus, who did not disappear but died on his own terms in a hospital in Wenatchee in the winter of my 9th year, of the kind of ordinary cancer that had nothing to do with the mountain. He was 72. I drove down and sat with him for 3 days at the end. He was mostly out of it by then, but he was lucid for a few hours on the second day, and he made me say the rules back to him. All 4. I said them. He nodded like I had passed a final examination. "Take care of them," he said. "I will. Don't try to figure out why." I won't. I mean it, Sarah. Some of the ones we lost, they died of curiosity as much as they died of the mountain. There's no answer. There's just the rules. I know. Say them one more time. I said them one more time. He closed his eyes and smiled a little. "Good," he said. "Good." He died the next morning. His daughter, who I had never met, a woman in her 40s named Anne who lived in Portland and worked for the state, was there when it happened, and she thanked me for coming. She said her father had spoken about me a lot. She said he'd told her once that hiring me was the best thing he did in his last 10 years of work. I didn't cry until I got back in the truck. I drove the 6 hours back to Wenatchee and up to the base station and up to the tower, and I sat on the cot in the dark and I let myself cry for the man who had saved my life in ways I would never fully understand. And then in the morning I checked the barometer at 7 a.m. sharp, and I logged the reading in the book, and I got on with it. That's what he would have wanted. I became the station coordinator in my 10th year. There was some talk of hiring somebody in from outside, a district manager type. But I lobbied hard for the position, and the regional office finally gave it to me. The salary went up a little. The paperwork went up a lot. I moved into the base station full-time in the summer months, and only went up to the tower for spot shifts when the seasonal lookout was on days off or sick. The seasonal lookouts, plural, because we now hired one every summer and rotated them off to a winter position elsewhere. Nobody but me stayed the winter anymore. That had been Marcus's compromise with headquarters back before I even arrived. They wanted him to hire 2 people to alternate the winter shift, and he had told them he would rather run it himself alone than train 2 more people for winter duty at Devil's Peak. When I took over, I kept his rule. If the tower had to be staffed in winter, I would staff it. I would not put a new person up there for the long dark. The reason for this is very simple. Rule 4 is easier to obey when you have 12 years of muscle memory. It is very, very hard for a new person. I have hired 11 lookouts since Marcus died. 6 of them made it through the season without incident and rotated out. 2 of them quit within the first 3 weeks. 1 after I gave her the orientation. 1 after a compass drill at the base station. Both of those are fine. Both are alive. 1 is a park ranger in Oregon now, and we exchange Christmas cards. 2 of them disappeared. The first was a young man named Peter Enge. He was 24. He had a degree in forestry from Colorado State. He was athletic, competent, careful, everything you want in a lookout. He heard me out about the rules, asked good questions, said the rules back correctly, and I put him on the tower in June of my 12th year here. He lasted 6 weeks. on a Friday night in the middle of July, at some point between his last radio check, 9 p.m., and his morning check, which never came, something happened. When I hiked up to the tower on Saturday morning, the trap door was open. His radio was on the floor by the light switch. The light switch was up, flipped to on, even though the lamp itself was cold, which meant the switch had been flipped and then flipped back off before dawn. His boots were standing at the top of the stairs. Empty. The observation lamp had a smudge on the housing. Not a fingerprint. Something else. I sat in the tower for a long time before I called it in. His parents came to Wenatchee for the memorial 2 months later. His mother asked me what could have happened. I said we didn't know. I said sometimes people got lost in the wilderness in ways nobody could ever explain. She looked at me the way people look at strangers who they suspect are lying to them, and I hated everything about that look, and I could not do anything to change it. The second was a woman named Reyna Gomez. She was 31, 2 summers ago. She had been a ranger at Crater Lake for 4 seasons before she came to us, and she was one of the sharpest applicants I ever interviewed. I liked her immediately. She heard the voice from Silver Creek. She did not ring the bell 12 times. She rang the bell 3 times, then stopped. I know because the log entry she made afterward, which I found in the tower, said she thought the voice sounded different from what I had described, and she wanted to see if she could hear it more clearly. She turned off the bell and stood on the catwalk and listened. I don't know what she thought she heard. Her log entry stops mid-sentence. Her boots were on the north catwalk this time, facing outward, like she had been about to climb down the stairs when she was taken. The word I keep coming back to is taken, though I do not know what it means or who or what does the taking. I have not filled the position since Reyna. It has been 2 summers now. The tower has been unstaffed except for the days I go up myself. Headquarters has been patient with me about it, largely because I am also the coordinator, and I have not stopped submitting the paperwork that says the tower is functionally active. Fire coverage in the sector has been reasonable. We've had a couple of small starts that other towers spotted first, and one bigger one that I flagged from the base station using the fire finder they installed on the ground floor a decade ago as an auxiliary. Nobody has died in a fire because of my understaffing. Yet. But it's been 2 years and I need to hire someone. My knees are starting to give me trouble on the climb up, and I am 52 years old and I cannot run the tower alone forever, which is why I am writing this. Whoever you are sitting in the base station reading this, if you have been given this file by the current station coordinator or by whoever has taken over after me, I want you to understand something. The rules are real. They are exactly as described on the laminated card. I have watched them save my life on more occasions than I can accurately count. I have watched their violation kill 3 people I hired myself, and I have watched them fail to save 2 more who did not know they existed. I'm writing this because Marcus Hale gave me a similar document on my 3rd day, in a manila folder in the base station office. His was handwritten, on legal pad, in his terrible left-handed scrawl. Mine is typed. But it says essentially the same things his said, and I hope that whoever reads it next will type up their own version in due course. I hope this document lives longer than any of us. I hope it is being read 100 years from now by someone whose grandparents were children when I died. The rules should not die with the people who followed them. Some things I have learned that were not in Marcus's document, that I want to add here. The barometer is not the only warning for the storm event. In my 4th year, I noticed that the birds go quiet about 10 minutes before the needle moves. Not just the songbirds, everything. Chickadees, ravens, the little juncos that hang around the tower. All quiet. If you notice a sudden hush and the barometer hasn't moved yet, start walking down the trail toward the root cellar. Do not wait to be sure. Move. The tongs need to be replaced every 5 to 7 years. They start to feel wrong in your hand. I don't know how else to describe it. Cold when they shouldn't be cold. Heavier than they should be. When they start feeling wrong, throw them in the burn barrel and take a new pair off the pegboard. There are 6 sets in the storage locker at the base station. Reorder them when you're down to 2. The bell is more forgiving than the card makes it sound. I once heard the voice from Silver Creek and rang the bell 14 times because I lost count and started over. 14 rings worked, but do not do less than 12. 10 is not enough. I know this because Sarah Winston, a lookout in my second year before I was coordinator, rang the bell 10 times and thought it was fine. She was gone by Tuesday. The light rule has a corollary Marcus never mentioned to me, which I discovered on my own. Do not open the shutters in the 247 to 333 window either. If you have them open for ventilation and you realize what time it is, close them. I don't know if the same thing that would remember you from the light would remember you from a shutter, but I have not opened a shutter in that window in 11 years, and I am still here. Here's a 5th rule that I want to add, which is not on the card but which I have started teaching to my hires. 5. If you find a laminated card that looks like the rules card, but the rules are different, even by 1 word, burn it immediately and do not look at it again. There is only one correct card. It is in your pocket. You know what it says. Anything else is not the rules. I have never had to enforce Rule 5, but I have found, twice, cards on the observation deck stairs that looked exactly like my card at first glance, and both times the wording had been changed. Once, Rule 3 said ring the bell exactly 11 times instead of 12. Once, Rule 4 had a different time window, 2:33 to 3:47 instead of 2:47 to 3:33. Both times I used the tongs to pick the card up and I dropped it in the burn barrel without reading it a second time. I am telling you this because I want you to be prepared for that specific trick. It is a real trick, and it is designed for people who have been on the mountain long enough to feel comfortable. The rules card is your friend. It is your lifeline, and there is something out there that knows this, and that will try to substitute a bad card for your good one. Do not let it. I am writing this on a Sunday in September. There is snow on the tops of the peaks already, and the aspens on the south-facing slopes are just starting to turn. In 2 weeks, I have a candidate coming up from the district office for an interview. Her name is Michelle Vance. She is 36, former Marine, honorably discharged in 2019, has spent 5 years since then working seasonal wildland fire jobs across Nevada and Oregon. Her application says she is looking for something more permanent. Her references all say the same thing about her, that she follows procedure to the letter and does not improvise. I think she might be right for it. I hope she is right for it. If she is, I will take her through the same orientation Marcus took me through. The wall of photos. I have added the ones we've lost since I took over, and the frame Marcus made for the wall now has more faces than empty spaces. The laminated card, the ride up the trail, the tower and the barometer, and the light switch and the bell. Everything the same way it was done for me. And if she is wrong for it, if she laughs at the rules or asks too many why questions or gets that particular, I am smarter than this look in her eyes that I have learned to spot. Then I will send her home. There is no shame in going home. Going home is what most people should do. You cannot know what it is like to live inside the rules until you have done it for a long time. In the beginning, they feel like a straitjacket. You resent them. You catch yourself wondering in the small, quiet hours of the morning whether the rules are the actual protection or whether the rules are the reason you're afraid all the time. Whether if you just ignored them once, one single time, cleanly, on your own terms, you would find that there had been nothing to be afraid of at all. This is the most dangerous thought a Devil's Peak lookout can have. It is the thought that killed Ann Robeson and Elias Park and Mike Doyle. It is the thought that killed Reina Gomez. It is the thought that comes for everyone who stays long enough for the rules to become boring. The way out of the thought is to remember that you have already made your choice. You are here. You have not left. Every day you continue to check the barometer on the hour is another day you have chosen not to test the rules, and if you have chosen not to test them for 1,000 days, you can choose not to test them today. The choice does not get harder. It gets easier. You get to a place where using the tongs is as automatic as buckling your seatbelt, where the beep of your watch at 2:47 wakes you gently and you go back to sleep, where the sound of the bell being rung 12 times is a sound you can produce in your sleep and have. That is the real gift Marcus gave me and that I hope to give whoever reads this next. Not the rules themselves, the rhythm of the rules, The way they can become the shape of a life instead of a burden on a life. The way the mountain, if you respect it, will let you stay. I never learned what the mountain is. I want to be clear about that too. 31 years, my years, plus Marcus's overlap, plus the years since, of records at this station, and I do not have a theory. I have observations. I have patterns. I have the practical knowledge of a person who has watched something and adapted to it without ever understanding it. But I do not know what walks on the catwalk at 3 in the morning. I do not know whose voice comes from Silver Creek. I do not know what the barometer is measuring when it points at storm. I do not know what would be remembered by the thing on the ridge if I turned on the light. I have theories, of course. Everyone in this line of work develops theories. Mine are boring. I think there is a place or a set of places in the North Cascades where something got in from somewhere else, a long time ago, long before any of the trees on this ridge were saplings, long before people lived here, and it did not go home. It is not one thing. It is many things, or one thing with many masks, and it has learned over the millennia what humans respond to. The voice from Silver Creek uses a human word because it has learned that human words are effective bait. The thing on the ridge uses a shape that is almost right because it has learned that almost right pulls at us in a specific way. The wallet or the knife or the candy wrapper on the observation deck is a lure that has been refined through generations of successful catches. That is my theory. I do not think it is provable. I do not need it to be provable. It is a story I tell myself to make the rules feel less arbitrary. Marcus had a different story, involving Ojibwe folk beliefs from a book he'd read once about the Great Lakes, but which he thought might apply here too. Ted, the driver who brought me up on my first day and who I got to know well over the years before he retired, had a story about industrial pollution and radiation from an atomic test in Nevada that he half believed and half didn't. Wallace at Copper Mountain thought it was aliens, at least when he was drunk. Elena at Sourdough thought it was fairies, and used the exact word fairies, and said it with a completely straight face, and I never knew whether she meant it or not. The stories don't matter. The rules matter. If you are reading this, and by you, I mean the specific person, 20 or 50 or 100 years from now, sitting in the base station with the yellowed pages of this document in your lap, the only thing I need you to take away is that the rules are real, and the rules work, and you will live if you follow them. You will not always want to. There will be nights when the voice from the creek sounds like someone you love. There will be mornings when you find an object on the observation deck that is beautiful, that seems safe, that you feel absolutely certain is a gift someone left for you as a kindness. There will be moments in the small hours when something moves on the ridge and, absolutely know that if you would just illuminate it for 1 second, you could get proof of everything and take that proof to a scientist and end the whole nightmare and be famous forever. Do not do it. Ring the bell 12 times. Burn the object. Do not turn on the light. Say the rules back until they are the same as your own heartbeat. Say them when you brush your teeth. Say them when you make coffee. Say them when you climb the stairs to the tower and when you climb back down. Say them in a whisper when the wind is loud and when the wind is quiet. Say them until the sound of them in your own voice is the most comforting sound in the world. Live inside them the way a monk lives inside a rule. That is the closest analogy I have found. There is a discipline to this work that is not really about fire watching, though the fire watching is real and important, and I have spotted 17 fires in my career and I am proud of all of them. The discipline is about accepting that some knowledge is not for us, that some things in this world do not need to be understood, that respect and distance and ritual are sometimes the only sane response to what we cannot explain. The people who leave here alive are the people who learn this. The people who do not learn this leave in another way. There is one more thing I want to write down before I close this document, because I have never told anyone, and I want it to be part of the record. In my 17th year, I broke Rule 2. It was a September evening, warm and clear, and I was up at the tower alone. The seasonal I'd hired that year, a nice kid named Josh, who ended his season without incident and now works as a smoke jumper out of McCall, was on days off. I had come up to cover him. The barometer went to storm at 7:14 p.m. Sky was completely clear. I watched the needle for 2 full minutes, waiting to see if it would drop back. It did not. I got up to leave. I had my hand on the trapdoor handle. And then, I do not know why, I did not go. I let the 3rd minute pass, and then the 4th, and I sat back down on the cot, and I watched the needle. It stayed at storm for 41 minutes. Nothing happened inside the tower. Nothing at all. I sat perfectly still and I stared at the barometer, and I felt the world holding its breath around me. And 41 minutes later, the needle drifted quietly back to change, and everything was normal again. I do not know what happened outside the tower during those 41 minutes. I did not open the shutters to check. I did not go outside afterward. I did not radio Marcus, who was still alive then, though only just, and would have been furious with me. I did not write it in the log. I have never told anyone, until right now. Nothing bad happened to me because of it. That is the thing I keep coming back to. I broke Rule 2, deliberately, and 41 minutes later I was still alive. I am still alive now, 16 years later. I do not know what to do with this fact. Sometimes I wonder if I got lucky. Sometimes I wonder if the tower itself, being high above the ground on its pilings, was protection enough for that specific event. Sometimes I wonder if the rules have a wider margin of safety than we think, and if you can violate them slightly under certain circumstances without consequences. And sometimes, this is the version that scares me the most, I wonder if the thing that would have hurt me if I had been outside did not know I was there, in the tower, that evening. If I had gotten away with something, because I had accidentally hidden well. Whichever it is, I'm writing it down here because I do not want the person reading this to think I have never been tempted. I have been tempted. I have even, once, given in. And the fact that I am still here is not evidence that the rules are optional. It is evidence, I believe, that I got extremely lucky, one time, in a way that I will never voluntarily test again. Do not do what I did. That is what I am asking you. Do not test the margin. Do not think that because I made it out, or because Marcus made it out, or because Wallace or Elena or Fitz made it out, that the rules are somehow overstated. The rules are not overstated. The people who made it out are the ones who followed them, and the people who did not follow them are gone. That is the whole story. Sarah Mercer, Station Coordinator, Devil's Peak Lookout, North Cascades District, Region 6. Written September, this year, P.S. I am attaching to this document a photograph of the wall in the mudroom, taken last spring. 29 faces now. 10 are still alive. The rest are not. Study the wall when you have time. Look at their faces. They were all good people. Every single one of them was smart and capable and brave. The ones who made it out were not smarter or more capable or braver than the ones who did not. They were only more obedient. That is what this job asks of you, in the end. Not intelligence, not courage. Obedience to a set of instructions that will never fully make sense. I know this is not what people expect from a life of public service in the wilderness. It was not what I expected either, when Marcus handed me the card in the base station on a September afternoon a lifetime ago. But it is what the work turned out to be. And it turned out, this is the part that still surprises me, to be a life worth having. A quiet, hard, honest life. A life spent watching the same mountains through the same windows for decades, and getting to know them the way you know a difficult but beloved person. A life spent following 4 simple rules. If you are reading this, welcome to Devil's Peak. Read the card. Say the rules back. Feel the card in your pocket. And come find me at the base station in the morning, and we will drink terrible coffee and I will take you up the trail. The tower is waiting for you. The mountain is waiting for you. Whatever is out there is waiting for you too. But if you do this right, you will never have to meet it. You will only have to know that it is there and to move through your days in a way that keeps a safe distance from it, and that is enough. That has to be enough. It has been enough for me. The forest road ran out of pavement 11 miles before it ran out of forest, and by the time I reached the Ashwater Ranger Station, my truck was wearing a second coat of gray dust. I parked in the turnaround and let the engine tick itself quiet. Nobody came out. A wind moved through the pines above the roofline and made a sound like water running somewhere underground. The station was smaller than the photograph on the district website. One story, cedar shingles gone silver with age, a stovepipe leaning slightly east, and a porch with 2 chairs on it that faced the trees instead of the road. Somebody had nailed a strip of tin over a hole in the siding and never gotten around to painting it. Behind the building, the ridge climbed steeply into black timber, and above that, so far up it looked like a toy, the fire lookout tower stood on its 4 steel legs with its windows catching the last of the sun. I had come 900 miles to sit in a place like this. That was the entire plan. No neighbors sharing a wall, no pager, no supervisor asking me gently in that voice they use whether I was ready to come back on shift. Just a paycheck, a bunk, and about 400,000 acres of nothing between me and anybody who knew my name. I got out and pulled my duffel from the passenger seat and stood in the smell of hot dust and pine pitch. The door opened. The woman who came out was in her 60s, short and thick through the shoulders, gray hair cut blunt at the jaw, wearing a district polo washed so many times the logo had gone to a ghost. She had reading glasses pushed up on her head and a mug in her hand that said, "World's Okayest Fisherman." "Vance," she said. "Nora Vance." "Yes, ma'am." "Meredith Kilgore, Mary." "Don't ma'am me. I'm not that old and you're not that young." She looked me over the way you look at a load before you decide how to lift it. My boots were new. My jacket still had the fold creases in it. She saw both. "Come in. We'll do paperwork later. There's something we do first." Inside smelled like coffee and wood smoke and the sweet sour must of old paper. 2 desks, a radio console with a hand mic on a coiled cord, a wood stove with a kettle on it, a kitchenette with 3 mugs drying on a towel. The whole west wall was maps, layered 3 deep, the top one stuck with colored pins and annotated in at least 4 different handwritings. Somebody had circled a section of drainage in red and written a date beside it. 1994. Mary set her mug down and took a laminated card off a nail by the radio. She held it out to me without a word. It was about the size of a diner menu. The lamination had gone yellow at the corners and cloudy where fingers had worn it. At the top, in typewriter capitals, Black Pine District, Station Protocols, memorized before first shift. Below that, 7 numbered lines. I read the first one and stopped. 1. If you hear your name called from off trail, do not answer. Note the time. If it is called a 3rd time, walk out the way you came in and do not run. I looked up. Mary was watching me with no expression at all. "Keep going," she said. 2. The lookout stairs are 41 steps. Count them every ascent out loud. If you reach 42, do not open the door. Descend, count on the way down, and radio the station before you try again. 3. Black Pine District has 5 stations. Between Oro 200 and Oro 400, the repeater will sometimes carry traffic from Station 6. Do not respond. Do not log it. Do not repeat aloud anything Station 6 says. 4. At dusk, do not hold eye contact with anything standing on the far bank of moving water. Break contact by looking down at your own feet, not by turning your head. 5. If you find an occupied campsite with a live fire and no people, do not extinguish the fire. Add wood. Leave the site by the trail you came in on. 6. If an animal is standing in the road and does not move for your horn or your high beams, reverse. Do not steer around it. Do not get out. 7. Any ranger you meet in the field who is not on the duty board, ask them the day of the week. If they answer without pausing, they're ours. If they pause, end the conversation, walk, and do not go back to your vehicle until you've walked at least 10 minutes in the wrong direction. I read the whole thing twice. Then I laughed. It came out of me before I could decide anything about it, one short, ugly bark of a laugh, and I heard how it sounded in that room and wished I hadn't. Sorry, I said. Is this okay? Is this a thing you do? To the new one? Is that what it looks like? It looks like a hazing card. Mary took her mug back off the desk and drank from it. It looks like a hazing card, she agreed. That's how everybody gets through the first reading of it. That's fine. I don't need you to believe it today. But you need me to follow it. Every line, every time. Whether or not it makes sense, whether or not you're tired, whether or not there's somebody standing in front of you telling you it's stupid. She set the mug down again. Especially then. I turned the card over. The back was blank except for a line of handwriting at the bottom, blue ink, small and cramped, added under the lamination at some later date because the plastic there was a different thickness. Rule 8. Waiting is not the same as refusing. What's Rule 8? You'll figure that one out on your own or you won't. She said it flatly, without cruelty, the way you'd tell somebody the well water runs rusty for the first 10 seconds. Everybody does. I want to explain the person I was on that first afternoon, because otherwise none of what follows will make sense. For 11 years I ran a medic unit out of Boise. You learn a specific reflex in that job and it burns itself into you at a level below thinking. Something screams, you move toward it. Somebody says, help me. You are already crossing the road. I have gone into a house that was actively on fire because a woman on the sidewalk said her mother was inside, and her mother was not inside. And I did not regret it then, and I don't now, because the arithmetic is simple. You go, or you spend the rest of your life being the person who didn't. In February, we took a call at 3:40 a.m., and I made a decision that was defensible in every review that examined it, and a 19-year-old named Kyle Ostrander died anyway. Everybody told me the decision was correct. My partner told me. The review board told me. The counselor the department sent me to told me twice a week for 2 months. And every one of them was right, and it changed nothing, because the thing that was broken in me wasn't guilt over the decision. It was that I no longer trusted my own reflex. It had always been the one thing about me I never had to check. So I quit. And I took a seasonal ranger job in a district so remote that the nearest hospital was 2 hours by road and 3 by helicopter. And I told myself this was rest. That is the woman who stood in the Ashwater station holding a laminated card and deciding, privately, that Meredith Kilgore was a lonely old woman with a superstition problem, and that I would be polite about it. I have thought about that a great deal since. She gave me the tour in about 9 minutes. Bunk room in the back with 2 beds and a window that didn't open. Bathroom with a water heater that had to be lit with a match. Kitchenette, wood stove, a generator shed out back with a fuel log on a clipboard. Radio console. And she made me practice the call signs until I had them. Ashwater was Black Pine 2. Mary was 2-1. I was 2-3. Who's 2-2? Danny Farrow, seasonal, 2nd year. He's up on Cut Bank doing trailhead counts back tomorrow. He's 23 and he'll talk your ear off about mushrooms. She hung the mic back on its hook. He follows the card. He's never once asked me why. It's the best quality he's got. There was a duty board on the wall by the door. A whiteboard with a grid drawn on it in permanent marker. 3 names, Kilgore, Farrow, Vance. Beside each name a column for location and a column for back by, filled in with dry erase in Mary's block capitals. You write on that board every time you leave, she said. Where and when, not approximately. If you're going to be past your time, you call it in and I change it. If I can't reach you and you're 40 minutes past, I start calling other people. That's not paranoia, that's just the job, that part they do everywhere. And the other part? The other part they don't do anywhere. She pulled open the bottom drawer of the metal filing cabinet under the maps. It was full, front to back, of manila folders packed so tight she had to work 2 fingers in to lift the first one. You want the sales pitch or you want to skip it? I'd like to know what I'm agreeing to. That's not the same as wanting it. But she took out the folder anyway and laid it open on the desk. The first page was an incident report on a form the agency had stopped using in the 90s, typed on an actual typewriter, with a photograph paper clipped to the corner. The photo was a man in his 40s in a uniform shirt, squinting, standing in front of a truck with one boot up on the bumper. Aaron Pike, Mary said. 22 years in this district. He trained me. In September of '09, he took a report of a fire ring smoldering at an empty site up Weatherby Creek, and he did the responsible thing, and he put it out, and he policed the site, and he wrote a very good report about it, and I have that report right there. She tapped the folder without looking down. 11 days later, his truck was found at the Weatherby trailhead, locked, keys in the cup holder, radio on the passenger seat with the battery still good. We ran that drainage with 60 people and 2 dogs and a helicopter for 9 days. You didn't find him. We found his hat, 4 miles up the wrong side of a ridge he had no reason to be on. And in March, 6 months later, 3 separate parties on 3 separate days reported meeting a ranger on the Weatherby Trail who gave them directions to a campground that has never existed. She closed the folder. 2 of those parties described him well enough that I could have picked him out of 100 men. The third one was a school teacher from Missoula who asked him what day it was because her phone had died and she'd lost track. I waited. He didn't know, Mary said. The room was very quiet. Out back, the generator wasn't running, and I could hear the pines doing their thing again, that underwater sound. You understand I can't do anything with that, I said, carefully. As information. I know you can't. I'm not calling you a liar. I didn't think you were. She slid the drawer shut with her knee. Here's all I want, Vance. I want you to follow a laminated card for 1 season. It costs you nothing. It's 7 lines. If at the end of the season you think I'm a crazy old woman who scared herself sick out here, you'll go home and you'll tell that story at parties, and I genuinely, sincerely, do not care. She picked up her mug, found it empty, and set it down. Everybody in that drawer thought the cost of following it was too high to be worth it. Every single one. That's the only thing they all had in common. The first 8 days were a job. That's the part nobody tells you about places like Black Pine. It is overwhelmingly, gloriously boring. I cleaned 2 vault toilets a day. I cut a downed subalpine fir off the cut bank trail with a cross-cut saw because it was wilderness, and we couldn't use a chainsaw. And it took Danny and me 4 hours, and I have never in my life slept better than I did that night. I counted cars at trailheads. Danny Farrow came down off cut bank on my second day, a rangy kid with a sunburn line across his forehead and an actual hand lens on a lanyard around his neck. Mary was right about the mushrooms. On the 3rd day, driving back from Loon Meadow with him, I brought up the card. I did it lightly. I was trying to be kind, actually. I had it in my head that Mary had spooked this kid, and that he was too polite to say so, and that maybe I could give him permission to think it was silly. He didn't take it. Yeah, it's real, he said, and reached over to adjust the heater vent. Danny, you asked. I asked if you believed it. That was a yes or no question, and you gave me a... That was the tone people use about the weather. He thought about it, driving. Okay, he said. My grandfather logged this drainage. My dad ran a hotshot crew out of Hamilton for 19 years. I've had like 4 generations of people telling me stories about this country, and 90% of it is stuff guys made up to scare each other in bunkhouses, and I know the difference. This isn't that. He shrugged. It's 7 things. 2 of them I've never had come up. 3 of them cost me nothing. 1 of them cost me a bad night once. That's the whole price. Why would I not pay it? Because it isn't true? Sure. Or because it is. He glanced over. Look, you're a medic. When you carried gloves, was that because you were sure the guy had Hep C? I didn't have a good answer to that, so I looked out the window and let it go, and I thought about it more than I let on. Here's the honest truth about those first 8 days, though, and it's the part I have the hardest time explaining to people who have only been in a national forest on a Saturday afternoon in July. Nothing happened, and something was wrong. Not dramatically. I want to be precise, because precision is the only thing that makes any of this worth writing down. It was that 100 small readings came in slightly off. At night, the timber above the station made noise the way timber does, and once or twice a week the noise stopped. Not faded, stopped, all of it, the way a room goes quiet when somebody walks in. It would last 20 seconds and then start again. Birds did that. It's a normal thing birds do. But they did it a lot. Twice I found tracks on the 2-track behind the generator shed that I could not identify, and I am good at tracks. I spent my childhood following my uncle around the Owyhees. These were none of those, and they weren't a bad print of any of those either. They were consistent. They came from the timber, went to about 9 feet from the back door, and turned around, and there was no return line. And on my 6th night, going out to shut down the generator, I stood on the back step with the door open behind me and the light spilling out around my legs, and I had the absolutely uncomplicated animal certainty that I was being looked at by something at the tree line. Not watched. Looked at. Considered. I stood there for a long moment with my hand on the doorframe, and I did not go get the flashlight, and I did not go look. And I told myself that was because it was cold. Rule 3 came for me on my 9th night. Mary had gone down to Hamilton for a supply run and a district meeting, and would be back the following afternoon, which left me on the station overnight for the first time alone. Danny was up at the Cutbank cabin. She wrote both of those things on the duty board before she left in her block capitals, and stood looking at the board for a second like she was reading it back to herself. "Radio's on all night," she said. "Volume stays up. You sleep with the door open so you can hear it." "Understood." "Vance." She had her keys in her hand. 02 to 04. "I remember the rule." "Say it back." I felt about 14 years old. "Do not respond. Do not log it. Do not repeat aloud anything Station 6 says." "Okay," she said, and left. And I watched her taillights go down through the switchbacks for a long time because you could see them a long way from that porch. I woke at 2:14 because the radio hissed. Not traffic, just the carrier opening. That soft rush of a squelch breaking somewhere, which is a sound I had heard 400 times in 9 days and never once woken up for. I lay in the bunk with my eyes open in the dark and listened to it hold for 4 seconds and close. Then a voice said, "Black Pine 6, radio check." It was a woman's voice. Calm, bored, mid-30s maybe, with the slightly clipped delivery that everybody develops on a mic. It was the most ordinary sound in the world. I sat up. I want to be very clear about what was going on in my head at that moment, because I've had a lot of time to take it apart. I did not think ghost. I thought, Mary has a piece of information wrong. There is a 6th station, or there was one, or somebody's using an old call sign, or this is a crew from another district on our repeater, or it's a couple of kids with a handheld from a hardware store, which is a thing that happens constantly. Every one of those is more likely than anything Mary had implied. And a person is on the radio at 2 in the morning doing a check, and there is nobody answering them. "Black Pine 6, radio check," she said again. Same tone. Not worried, just going through it. I got out of the bunk and walked into the office in my socks. The console's display was the only light in the room. A dim green wash over the desk and the map wall. 12 seconds. Then, "Black Pine 6, radio check, anybody up?" And she laughed a little at the end of it. A small, tired laugh, the kind you do at 2 in the morning when you're talking to nobody. I put my hand on the mic and I didn't pick it up. I want credit for that, honestly. It's the only thing I did right that night. I stood there with my hand on it for probably a full minute, and what stopped me wasn't belief. It was Mary standing by the door making me say it back to her, and the stubborn, ridiculous social fact that I had promised a 62-year-old woman I would do a thing. At 2:31, the carrier opened again. "Ashwater 6. Everything in my chest went down about 2 inches. Ashwater 6. Nora, you awake? I had been on that district for 9 days. My name was on a duty board inside a locked building, on a personnel form in Hamilton, and in the mouths of exactly 2 people. Nora. The voice was patient. I know you're at the console. It's fine. You don't have to say anything. I just need you to write something down for me. I did not move. I have never in my life been so aware of the sound of my own breathing. Mary's coming back up the Black Pine Road tomorrow around 4, it said. Tell her not to take the shortcut at the switchback. Tell her the culvert's out. She'll believe you if you tell her. She won't believe me. There is a specific horror in being handed a piece of useful, sensible, actionable information by something that should not know your name. Because it's reasonable. It's a favor. Everything in you wants to engage with it on its own terms, to say, how do you know? To say, who is this? To say thank you. And every one of those is a door. The carrier closed. 11 seconds. Opened. Nora. I turned around and walked out of the office. I stood in the bunk room in the dark with my hands over my ears like a child, and I could still hear the shape of it through the wall. That even reasonable rhythm. My name in it twice more. At some point after 3, it stopped. I sat on the floor with my back against the bunk frame until the window turned gray, and then I made coffee and drank it on the porch in the cold, watching the light come down the far ridge, and I felt absolutely fine, which frightened me more than the night had, because here's what I did next. I went inside, and I opened the station log, and I wrote, 0214-0303. Unidentified traffic on repeater, female voice, using call sign, Black Pine 6. Referred to station personnel by name. No response given. Recommend district check for unauthorized use. I read it over. It was a good entry. It was accurate. It was professional. It was the kind of thing that gets a technician sent up to look at a repeater. And it was the correct action for any rational person in any rational world to take. Do not log it. I had a pen in my hand, and a perfectly clean explanation for why this particular line of a laminated card was the one that was just superstition, and I sat there for a while with the pen and I thought, in words, this is exactly how Aaron Pike wrote a very good report about a campfire. I didn't scratch it out. Scratching it out leaves it there. I tore the page out of the logbook and I burned it in the wood stove, and I wrote the day's date on the new page and under it, 0214-0303. Nothing to report. That is the first lie I ever told in an official record, and I have never once regretted it. Mary came up the road at 4:10 the next afternoon. I was splitting rounds behind the station when I heard the truck, and I came around front with the maul still in my hand and watched her park, and I did not say a single word about culverts. She got out, looked at my face, and stood there with the door open. Long night, she said. Yeah. You want to tell me? No. She nodded slowly, reached back into the cab and came out with 2 grocery bags. That's the right answer, she said, and handed me one, and we carried the supply run inside and put it away, and she never asked me again. 3 days later, I climbed the lookout for the first time. Ashwater Lookout sits on a knob at 7,400 feet, 40 minutes up a switchbacking trail from the station, and it hasn't been staffed full-time since the 80s. We used it as a repeater site and a radio dead spot fix and an excuse to get a 200-degree view of the district after lightning. There'd been a dry cell over the cut bank drainage the night before, and Mary wanted eyes on it in the morning, which is standard. You look for smoke the day after, not during. You'll count, she said. Not a question. Out loud. Out loud. The out loud part isn't decoration. The trail up is nothing special. Pine, then subalpine fir, then that stunted, twisted stuff at the top that grows sideways out of rock. The tower is a 40-foot steel frame with a 14-by-14 cab on top, catwalk all the way around, and a staircase that switches back on itself 4 times inside the frame. I stood at the bottom with my hand on the rail and felt profoundly stupid, and then I started up. 1, 2, 3. You can't do this quietly. The steps are open steel grate, and they ring. My voice sounded thin and ridiculous coming back off the metal. 14, 15, 16. First landing. Turn. The wind up there was doing about 15, and there was a raven working the updraft on the west side, hanging in one place with its head turned, watching me count. 28. 29. Third landing. Turn. I could see the whole Weatherby drainage laid out below me now, still holding morning shadow in the bottom, and a thin haze of blue over the far ridges that was probably just moisture. 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. I put my foot on the next step, and it was there, and my hand was already coming up toward the door handle, which was right in front of me at chest height. Exactly where a door handle is when you've reached the top of a staircase. 41. There was another step above me. I stood on 41 with my hand 8 inches from the handle and looked at the step above my foot, and the landing above that and the door, which was also above that. 2 treads and a landing between me and a door that had been right in front of my face half a second earlier. I did not have any sensation of the world changing. Nothing lurched. My hand was still out in front of me. Through the cab windows I could see the underside of the roof, the corner of the old Osborne firefinder table, and one square of blue sky on the far side, and a shape between me and that square of sky, standing inside the cab, at about the height a person would be if a person were standing at the top of the stairs waiting for the door to open. It did not move. I said, 42, out loud, because my mouth was already doing it, and I have wondered ever since whether that was a mistake. Then I got out of there. I want to say I descended in a calm and orderly fashion, counting steps as instructed. What I actually did was go down that staircase with my hands sliding on both rails and my boots hitting maybe every third tread, and my voice going the whole way in a flat, rapid mumble that wasn't really counting anymore. I hit the ground and kept going about 30 feet into the rocks before I stopped and turned around. The tower stood there. Steel legs, cab, catwalk, the raven now sitting on the northeast corner of the railing cleaning its beak on the rail. A staircase with 4 landings. I got the handheld off my belt, and my hands were not good, and it took me 2 tries. Black Pine 2, 2-3. 2-3 go. I'm at the lookout. I counted 42. There was no pause at all. Copy 42. Are you on the ground? I'm on the ground. Is the door open or closed? I looked up. Closed. Okay, walk down to the saddle where the trail bends, that's about 10 minutes, and sit down there and drink some water and don't look back up at it. I'll call you in 20. Mary. 20 minutes, Vance. Then we'll talk about anything you want. So I walked down to the saddle and sat on a rock in the sun and drank half a liter of water and shook. It's a thing bodies do. There's no shame in it, and I've seen it in people a lot tougher than me. But I'd never had it happen over something that hadn't happened. She called it 19 minutes. How are you doing? I'm fine. I wasn't, but it was becoming true again. Mary, what's in the cab? Nothing's in the cab. I was up there Tuesday, the firefinder, the stool, a case of MREs from probably 2011, and a hantavirus problem. There was something standing in it. I know, she said. I sat with that. How many times has this happened to you? I asked. 4. In 31 years. A crackle of wind on her end. She was outside, probably on the porch. First time I was maybe 2 years in, and I was a lot like you, and I did what you'd expect. You opened the door. I opened the door, she said. There was nothing in the cab, and I did my smoke check, and I came down, and I was fine, and I felt real good about myself for about 9 days. A pause, and then something that sounded like my sister called me on the station phone, and we don't have a station phone. After the tower, I stopped arguing. I didn't start believing exactly. Belief is a bigger, cleaner thing than what happened to me, and I've never gotten all the way there even now. What happened was more like the way you stop arguing with a hot stove. I still had no theory. I had no mechanism, no name, nothing I could have said in a sentence to a doctor without being asked some follow-up questions. What I had was a laminated card that had been right twice, and a rule about not needing it to make sense. I read the card again that night, properly, the way I'd read protocols when I was 23 and new and scared of doing it wrong. 3 of the 7 were about not going toward something. 2 were about not answering something. 1 was about not looking at something. 1, 5, the campfire, was about doing something for it and leaving. That's a strange pattern. If you were writing rules to protect people from an animal, you'd write about food storage and travel in groups and what to do if it charges. Every single line on that card was about interaction. Everyone described a situation where something wanted a response from a human being, and everyone told you exactly which response to withhold. Somebody had figured that out by trial and error. That was the part I couldn't stop looking at. Somewhere behind every line was a person who'd found out the other way. Rule 6 came up on a Thursday, driving back from Loon Meadow after dark. I'd stayed late helping a Boy Scout troop leader from Spokane figure out that his fuel canister was full and his stove was broken, and I was coming down the 468 road at maybe 20 with my brights on, tired, thinking about dinner. There was an elk in the road. Cow elk, no calf, standing broadside across both tracks about 60 feet ahead, head turned toward me, which is the most ordinary sight on that road. I had probably slowed for 200 elk that month. I stopped and waited, and she didn't move. I gave her a few seconds, then a light tap of the horn, which normally sends them straight into the timber. She didn't move. I flashed the brights twice. Her eyes did the thing eyes do in headlights, that flat coin-bright shine, and she stood there in the middle of the road with her head turned toward my windshield and did not move a muscle. Not an ear. Elk are never still like that. Nothing alive is still like that. Even a sleeping animal has a rhythm to it. I sat with my foot on the brake and my hands on the wheel, and I watched her not breathe. The road was wide enough there. That's the thing I keep coming back to. It was a good stretch of the 468 with a decent shoulder on the downhill side, and I could have put 2 wheels in the gravel and gone around her at walking speed with room to spare. And any reasonable person in the state of Montana would have done exactly that. I put it in reverse. Backing a truck a quarter mile down a forest road at night, on a road that drops off on one side, with your reverse lights lighting up about 11 feet of nothing behind you, is genuinely dangerous. I went slow, one arm over the seat watching the ditch line in the backup lights, and I did not look at the mirror, and I did not look at the mirror, and I did not look at the mirror. At the wide spot by the creek crossing, I got the truck turned around, and I drove 22 miles the long way around the district on the 12 and came up the Black Pine Road from the south and got to the station at 11:40 at night. Mary was still up. She had the stove going and a book open, and she looked at me over her glasses when I came in. 6, I said. Where? The 468 about a mile below the Loon Junction. What was it? A cow elk. She got up and wrote it on the calendar hanging by the radio. Just the date and 468 Loon elk in small letters, in a row of similar notations going back through the whole summer that I had never once looked at closely. You went the long way? Yeah. Good. She sat back down. It's usually deer. Once in a while it's a horse, and I've never figured out where a horse would come from up there. She picked her book back up. There's Stu. Rule 1 was 2 weeks later, in daylight, in the most beautiful place I have ever stood. I was doing a solo patrol up the Weatherby, which is the drainage where Aaron Pike went. And yes, I noticed that. And no, I didn't ask to be sent somewhere else. There's a bench up there at about 6 miles where the timber opens into a meadow with a creek running through the middle of it, and in late August the whole thing goes gold, and there are usually sandhill cranes in the wet end. It was about 2 in the afternoon. Sunlight, no wind, 70 degrees. There was a family of 4 eating lunch on a rock a quarter mile behind me on the trail. I had said hello to them 12 minutes earlier. Somebody off to my left, up in the timber, said, "Nora." I stopped walking. Here is what happens in your body. Nothing bad at first. It's your name. Your name in a friendly, ordinary voice at conversational volume from 40 yards away. Every single system you have comes online in helpful mode. Your head starts to turn, your mouth is already opening. You are, in that first instant, a person being greeted by a friend. Nora, twice. The rule doesn't say what to do at 2. It says note the time, and if it comes a third time, walk out the way you came and don't run. I looked at my watch. 2:07. I have never in my life had to work so hard to look at anything as I did to look at that watch face instead of at the tree line, and I remember that the second hand was between the 4 and the 5. 15 seconds. 20. I thought about the family on the rock behind me. I thought about how sound carries in a meadow, and about whether they had heard it and whether they'd heard a woman's name or their own. At about 30 seconds from a different position, 30 or 40 feet further up the slope, which is a distance nothing crosses silently through blowdown, the voice said, Nora. 3. I turned around and I walked out the way I had come in, and I did not run, and that walk is the longest 6 miles of my life. The thing about not running is that it forces you to stay inside your own body. If you run, you get to be an animal for a while, and animals aren't afraid the way people are, they're just fast. Walking, you have time. You have time to hear that the timber on your left has gone quiet in a moving band that keeps pace with you, and to notice when it stops being on your left and starts being ahead of you and to the right, and to do arithmetic about how something got there. I caught up to the family after a half mile. 2 parents, 2 kids, maybe 8 and 11, packing up their lunch. Hey, I said, I'm heading down. There's a lot of daylight left, but I'd like company on the trail if you don't mind. The mother looked at me for about a second and a half, then she said, Kids, boots on. She knew. I don't mean she knew anything about black pine or the card or what was in the timber. I mean she looked at a park ranger's face and made a decision in a second and a half without asking me a single question, and I have thought about that woman a lot. We walked out together. I made conversation about huckleberries. The 11-year-old told me at length about a video game. At the trailhead, they got in a green minivan with Washington plates, and the mother rolled the window down and said, You okay? And I said, Yes, thank you. And she nodded and drove away, and I have no idea what her name was. Then I sat in my truck in an empty parking lot in the sun and put my forehead on the steering wheel. It hadn't come out of the timber. Not once, in 6 miles. It had stayed in there, 20 or 30 yards up the slope, for at least the first 4 of those miles. I could track it by the silence and twice by the sound of something taking a step and not committing to the next one. And it had never come out into the open, and it had never said my name again. That's what I told Mary that night, and it's the only time all summer I saw her look genuinely pleased with me. You noticed, she said. Noticed what? That it wouldn't cross into the open, and that it stopped talking once you didn't answer. She was cleaning a Pulaski head with a file, sitting on the porch step in the last light. That's Rule 8 territory, that is. That's the actual thing. You keep saying Rule 8. Because you're getting there and I'm not going to spoil it. Mary, for God's sake. She kept filing. Scrape, scrape. You want the shape of it or the whole thing? The shape. They can't make you do anything, she said. That's the shape. In 31 years, I have never once seen or heard of one of them touch a person who didn't come to it. Not one. They can't come in the door. They can't cross open ground in daylight. They can't lay a hand on you in a truck with the windows up. She turned the head over. What they can do is talk. So everything on that card is about talking. Because talking is the only weapon they've got. And the only way it works is if you answer. Aaron Pike walked up the Weatherby of his own free will, and I would bet this station he was going to help somebody. She set the file down. Everybody in that drawer went to advance. Everyone. It's a hunting method, and the bait is us being decent. The campfire was the following week, and it was Danny's call, and it's the one I think about when I want to feel good about something. We were doing a 2-day patrol up Cutbank together, and we came into an established site at Grayling Lake at about 6 in the evening, and there was a fire going in the ring. Not a smolder, a live fire, 6 inches of flame, recently fed, with a stack of split wood beside it that hadn't come from anywhere near there because there's no split wood in a wilderness area. There was a tent up, a good one, a blue 3-season with the fly on. There was a pack against a log with the lid unbuckled. There was a pot on a rock with water in it. And there was nobody there, and no sound, and the lake was flat as a plate. "Hello," Danny called. "Forest Service." Nothing. The fire popped. He walked the site once, slowly, all the way around the outside, hands off everything. I watched him do it, and I realized he was counting things. Then he came back and stood beside me and said quietly, "Okay, so, tent's got no boots outside it, and the doors zipped from the outside. Pack's got no straps adjusted, they're all factory length. Water's cold." He nodded at the pot. "It's been sitting. How long's the fire been going?" "That's the thing. That fire's been going a long time." He looked at the woodpile. "That's more wood than a person carries in for one night, and none of it's from this basin." My whole body wanted to yell for whoever was out there. I want that in the record. 9 years of medic work and every instinct I own was screaming that there was a person face down in the brush somewhere within 200 yards of me with a head injury, and that every minute mattered, and that the correct action was to search a spiral pattern out from the site immediately and call it in. "Danny," I said, "what if it's real?" He didn't answer right away, and I respected him for that. "Then somebody's in trouble," he said, "and what we do is walk out to the ridge where we've got line of sight and call it in to Mary, and she calls the county, and a search comes in tomorrow with 12 people who all know the rules in daylight, instead of 2 of us splitting up in the dark." He looked at me. "That's not us doing nothing. That's us doing it the way it works." Then he went to the wood pile and picked up 4 pieces of split larch and laid them on the fire, crosswise, carefully, the way you'd build it up for the night. He did it without hurrying. He straightened up, and he said, out loud, to nobody, in a perfectly polite voice, "That'll hold you till morning." And we walked out on the trail we'd come in on, and neither of us looked back. And behind us I could hear the fire taking the new wood, and it sounded exactly like a fire. The county ran a search up there the next day with 19 people. They found the tent, empty, and about 40 years old, a model that hadn't been sold since the early 80s, with the fabric gone to powder where the sun hit it. They found no pack. They found a fire ring with no ash in it at all. Danny wrote the report. He put down, "Occupied appearance, no persons located, site cold on second visit." Mary signed it. Nobody at the county blinked, and I understood watching that happen that there were probably 100 reports like it in the drawer downstairs, and that the whole system had quietly agreed on a vocabulary for this a long time ago. I broke Rule 4 on the 11th of September, and I broke it on purpose, and I need to explain why, because "she got curious" isn't good enough. By September, I had followed that card for 2 months, and it had cost me a night's sleep, a long walk, and 40 extra miles of driving. That's all. And in return, I had been handed the single largest question of my life, and no way at all to look at it. I had started to feel like a person keeping her eyes closed in a room to avoid seeing the furniture. So on the 11th of September at dusk, I walked down to the Weatherby crossing below the station, and I sat on a rock on the near bank, and I waited to see if anything came. The creek there is maybe 30 feet across and fast, loud enough that you have to raise your voice. Alder on both banks. The light goes early in that bottom because of the ridge, so by 7:30 the far bank was in that blue shadow where color drains out but you can still see shapes fine. At 7:52, something stood on the far bank. It came out of the alder without moving the alder. That was the first thing. My whole life I have known what it looks like when brush lets something through, and this was not that. It was more like a section of the shadow between 2 trunks resolved and had a shape. Man height. Man-shaped, in the way a coat on a door is man-shaped. It was dark all over, and I could not tell you one thing about its surface, whether it had hair or clothing or skin, because my eyes kept sliding off it and having to start again. It had a head, and the head was turned toward me, and after a moment it tilted. A small movement, maybe 15 degrees, the exact angle a dog uses when it's interested. I looked at it. That was the whole experiment. I sat on a rock in the cold and looked at a thing on the other side of 30 feet of loud water, and it looked back, and the creek ran. And neither of us moved for what I have always thought was about a minute, and my watch said was 9. Then it opened its mouth. It did not make a sound. It stood on the far bank with its face toward me, and it worked its jaw, slowly, deliberately, 6 or 7 times, and I understood with a clarity that has never once faded that it was practicing, that it was learning the shape my mouth was making or trying shapes on to see which one I'd answer. Then it stopped, and it turned its head slightly further and held that, and I felt the way you do when someone has just decided something about you. I looked down at my own feet. Both boots, the wet rock, a caddis case stuck to the stone. When I looked up, it was gone, and the alder had not moved. I walked back up to the station in the dark, which was stupid, and I got inside and shut the door and stood with my back against it, and Mary looked at me from the desk and put her pen down and said, "Oh, Nora." I told her all of it. It took about 4 minutes. She listened the way she listened to radio traffic without any expression, and when I was done, she got up and poured me a coffee I didn't want and put it in my hands. "How long did you hold it?" 9 minutes. 9. She sat down. "That's okay. That's a lot. What does it do?" "It learns you," she said. "That's all. That's the whole reason for the rule. Everything else on that card is about a thing that already knows how to be a voice. Rule 4 is about how they get the voice in the first place." She looked at the black window over the sink. "They watch. That's not a threat. It doesn't hurt you. Nothing's going to come through that wall tonight. It just means that at some point something out there is going to say something to you in a voice it built by watching your face for 9 minutes. How long until? No pattern I've ever found. Days, years. Aaron went 11 days. She said it plainly without softening it, which I have always been grateful for. You're going to be fine. You just have to be more careful than you were planning to be for a while. The last of the 7 happened 9 days after that, which I don't think was a coincidence. I was on the Cutbank Trail, coming down from the cabin, about a mile above the trailhead, and there was a ranger coming up. Full uniform, green pants, gray shirt, the badge, the flat hat that almost nobody actually wears in the field, a radio on his belt, and a small green day pack. He was maybe 55, gray at the temples, a heavy-set man with a very pleasant face, and he raised a hand when he saw me and called out, "Afternoon." Everything about him was correct. Every single thing. The uniform was right down to the sewn-on district patch, which is not a thing you can buy. He was walking on the trail. His boots were dusty. He had a sunburn on the back of his hands. The duty board that morning had 3 names on it: Kilgore at the station, Faro, Loon Meadow, back by 1700, Vance, Cutbank, back by 1600. "Afternoon," I said, and stopped about 15 feet from him, which is a strange distance to stop at, and he noticed. I saw him notice. "You must be the new one." He smiled. "I'm up out of Hamilton. They've got me doing trail condition on this whole side." "That's a lot of ground." "It surely is." The card said to ask them the day of the week. Standing there in the sun, with a friendly middle-aged man in a correct uniform 15 feet away, that instruction felt so insane that I actually considered skipping it. I want that on the record too, because it's the whole point. Every one of these rules is easy in the abstract and nearly impossible in the moment. "Hey," I said, "this is going to sound strange. What day is it?" And he paused. It wasn't long. Maybe a second and a half. About the same length of time the mother on the Weatherby Trail had taken to decide about me. Just long enough for a smile to stay in place with nothing behind it. Then he said, "Thursday." And it was Thursday. And it did not matter at all, because I had already seen the thing that happened in his face while the answer was being assembled. "Right," I said. "Thanks. Long summer." "It sure has been," he said warmly. I stepped off the downhill side of the trail and started walking, and I did not go to the trailhead where my truck was because the trailhead was 15 minutes downhill, and that was the direction he'd come from, and Rule 7 said walk the wrong way for 10 minutes first. So I contoured east across the slope through open larch, which is miserable walking, and I did 10 minutes by the watch. and then I sat down behind a root ball and I waited another 10, and I listened. At about minute 14, something came along the slope above me, moving in the same direction I'd gone at the speed of a person walking on a trail. There is no trail on that slope. It went past, 30 or 40 yards up, and kept going east, and the sound of it faded, and it did not come back. I gave it another 20 minutes, and then I went straight down the fall line to the road and walked the road to my truck, which was sitting in an empty lot in the afternoon sun with nothing wrong with it at all. On the 29th of September, a man drove into the station yard at 6:40 in the evening with his horn going. His name was Curtis Duarte. He was 44, he was from Bozeman, and his niece Marisol had walked away from their camp at Grayling Lake at about 2 that afternoon to photograph a waterfall a half-mile up the inlet, and had not come back. She was 16. She had a jacket and a phone with no service and no water. There were 6 people in that camp, and 5 of them had been searching and yelling since 4 o'clock and had found nothing. And Curtis had driven 2 hours out to us because there was no other way to tell anybody. Mary had the county on the phone in 90 seconds, and a helicopter request in 4 minutes. Danny was on his way in from Loon, and it was going to be full dark in 50 minutes, and the inlet basin above Grayling is a mile of head-high alder and blowdown, and a girl with a broken ankle in that country at 34 degrees overnight is not a search, it's a race. We went in. That's the part people always want me to justify, and I never will. 3 of us, me, Curtis, and Danny, who caught us at the trailhead, went up the inlet at dusk with headlamps and a radio, because a 16-year-old was on the ground somewhere in there and the helicopter was 90 minutes out. I stopped both of them at the last open ground before the alder, and I said the only thing I could think of that would fit into 30 seconds. There are going to be voices in there, I said. Some of them will not be her. You do not go to a voice. You do not answer a voice. You call, and then you listen, and you only move towards something that answers the actual question you asked. If you hear her, you say her name and you ask her something new. Every time. Do you understand me? Curtis stared at me. What are you talking about? Say yes. Yes. Danny stays with you. Go. The first hour was normal, and it was awful in the normal way. Brush that takes 40 minutes to cross 400 yards, ice water in your boots, 3 headlamps in a mile of black timber, and a girl's name going out into it over and over and coming back off the rock walls of that basin. At 8:20, the voices started. Help me. Off to the left, low on the slope, a young woman's voice. Curtis went about 4 steps before Danny got a fistful of his jacket. Help me. Straight ahead now, 200 yards, same voice, same words, and here's the thing I had been waiting for and praying I was right about. Identical, not similar. Identical. The same rise and fall, the same catch in the middle, the same volume, the way a recording is the same. A person in pain does not say a thing twice the same way. A person in pain gets more hoarse, or more angry, or quieter as they give up. Marisol, I called. If you can hear me, tell me what's under you. Rock or dirt or wood. Tell me what's under you. Help me, said the timber, from 3 directions. Tell me what's under you. Help me. Curtis was making a sound I have heard maybe a dozen times in my career and never anywhere else, and he was shaking, and Danny had both arms around him from behind now. That's not her, I said. Curtis, look at me. That is not her voice. That is her voice played back, and every second we spend walking at it is a second we're not finding her. Do you hear me? And then, from far up the basin, thin and cracked and much smaller than the others, I'm on a rock and there's a dead tree. I can't stand up. New words, new information, an answer to my actual question. That's her, I said. That's her. Go, go, go. It took us 31 minutes to cover the last 600 yards. She was on a slab at the base of the waterfall with a broken fibula and the beginnings of hypothermia, and she had been screaming for 6 hours, which is why her voice was gone. And when my light hit her, she started crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Curtis wasn't with us. He'd been 8 feet from Danny at the base of the last talus field. Danny turned to give him a hand up and he wasn't there, and there was no sound. And Danny called his name for a minute and a half and then made the correct and unbearable decision and came on up to me and the girl. Because that's what the rules are for. We got Marisol out at 1:20 in the morning. Danny and me and 4 county SAR guys who'd come in behind us in a litter, in the dark. She's fine. She has a rod in her leg and she's studying wildlife biology at Missoula now, and she sends Mary a card every Christmas. They searched for Curtis Duarte for 11 days. 60 people, dogs, 2 helicopters, an infrared pass. They found 1 boot print at the edge of the talus, pointed uphill, away from the direction we had been traveling. Nothing else. Ever. I sat with his sister in the trailhead lot on the 4th day and she asked me if he'd suffered and I said no, and I do not know whether that was a lie. I wrote the report on the 10th day, at the desk, with the stove going, and Mary across from me not saying anything. I put down the time of the initial report, and the coordinates and the weather and the composition of the search party, and the mechanism of the patient's injury and the extraction time. I put down that C. Duarte separated from the party at about 2140 hours at the base of the talus field, that verbal contact was lost immediately, and that a search was initiated at first light. I did not write down the voices. There's no box on the form for that, and there never will be. And I understand now that this is not a cover-up. It's just that some things can only be handed to the next person the way Mary handed them to me. On a laminated card, by somebody standing in the room with you, who can make you say it back. When I finished, I took the card down off its nail and read the bottom line again. Rule 8. Waiting is not the same as refusing. And I finally understood what it had been telling me all summer, and why Mary wouldn't say it out loud, because it isn't a rule about monsters at all. Every line on that card looks like an instruction to be a worse person. Don't answer. Don't look. Don't help. And that's exactly what the things in that basin are counting on. Not our fear, our decency. They know we run it screaming. They have known it a lot longer than we've known about them. They don't need to be strong or fast or clever, because we will cross any distance in the dark for a voice that says, "Help me." And we will do it gladly. And we will do it again tomorrow. The card doesn't tell you not to go. Curtis is gone because he went 4 steps too early. And Marisol is alive because I stood in the black timber with my heart coming apart and made the woods answer a question first. That's all Rule 8 is. Not, don't help. Just, make sure there's someone there to help. I came back the next season, and the one after that. Mary retired in June, and I run Ashwater now. There's a new seasonal coming up the road next week, 26 years old, very sure of herself. Drove up from Colorado with brand new boots. The card is off its nail and sitting on the desk in front of me. Last winter I added a 9th line at the bottom in my own handwriting, the way somebody did before me, and I had it laminated over in Hamilton so it'll outlast me. Rule 9. You will want to explain all of this to yourself. Do that on your own time. Follow the card tonight. My name is Roger Brown, and what happened to me in the Wind River Range of Wyoming during the autumn of 2004 still haunts me 20 years later. I've never spoken about it publicly until now. The official report said it was a bear attack, that my partner and I were victims of an unusually aggressive grizzly. The Park Service accepted that explanation because it was easier than confronting the alternative. But I know what I experienced out there in those mountains, and no amount of rational explanation can erase the memory of those 3 days. I'd been working as a park ranger for 6 years by then, stationed at various posts throughout the western United States. The Wind River assignment was supposed to be my reward, a promotion of sorts. I'd requested it specifically. Most rangers dreaded the isolation of the Wind River Reservation territory, the vast, unforgiving wilderness that stretched for hundreds of square miles, much of it unmapped and untouched by modern civilization. But that isolation was exactly what drew me to it. I was 34 years old that year, divorced for 2 years, and still carrying the weight of a failed marriage like a stone in my chest. The mountains offered something my life in the suburbs never could. Silence. Not just the absence of noise, but true, profound silence. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts without the constant buzz of civilization drowning them out. Out there, among the pine and granite, I could breathe. The Wind River Range isn't like Yellowstone or the Grand Tetons. Tourists rarely ventured into our territory. The terrain was too rugged, the trails too poorly maintained, and the weather too unpredictable. We'd get a handful of experienced backpackers each season, maybe some hunters during the appropriate months. But for the most part, the vast majority of the range remained pristine and empty. That was how I liked it. I wasn't alone that October day. My partner was a younger ranger named Gordon Hayes. He'd transferred from a station in Montana about 14 months earlier, eager and competent, though still green when it came to the truly remote areas of the backcountry. Gordon was 26, fresh-faced, with that earnest quality that made him take everything seriously. He followed protocols to the letter, maintained his equipment with obsessive care, and approached each patrol like it might be his last. At first, I found his intensity exhausting, but over time, I came to appreciate his thoroughness. In country this remote, one mistake could kill you. A twisted ankle 20 miles from the nearest road could become a death sentence if you weren't prepared. Gordon understood that, even if his understanding came more from textbook knowledge than hard experience. We'd set out before dawn on October 17th, a Tuesday. The assignment was routine, a multi-day patrol through the northwestern quadrant of our territory, checking for any signs of illegal hunting, inspecting the few backcountry campsites for damage, and generally maintaining a presence in areas that might otherwise go months without seeing another human being. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 40s, ideal conditions for covering ground. The first day passed without incident. We hiked 12 miles, following an old game trail that wound through dense stands of lodgepole pine and across several alpine meadows, already brown and brittle with the approaching winter. Gordon kept up easily, his pack lighter than mine, his steps energetic. We talked occasionally, mostly about the landscape, the wildlife we spotted, the condition of the trails. Normal conversation. But as afternoon faded into evening and we set up camp near a small creek, I noticed something that bothered me. Gordon had been quiet for the last hour of hiking, and when I asked him about it, he'd brushed it off as fatigue, but I could see it in his eyes. Something was troubling him. "You sure you're all right?" I asked as we filtered water from the creek. He hesitated, glancing around at the darkening forest. "You ever get the feeling you're being watched out here?" I paused, considering the question. "Sometimes. Usually it's just wildlife. Elk. Maybe a mountain lion keeping its distance." "Why?" "I don't know." He shook his head, as if trying to dispel the thought. "Probably nothing, just this place feels different than anywhere else I've worked." "Different how?" "Heavier, maybe. Like the air itself has weight." He laughed, embarrassed. "That sounds stupid." "No," I said slowly. "I know what I mean." And I did. The Wind River Range had always felt different to me, too, though I'd never articulated it quite the way Gordon just had. There was a quality to the silence here, a depth to it that went beyond mere absence of sound. Sometimes, deep in the backcountry, I'd experience moments where the world seemed to hold its breath, where every bird went quiet simultaneously, where even the wind died to nothing. Those moments never lasted long, maybe 10, 15 seconds, but they always left me unsettled. We ate dinner in near silence, our freeze-dried meals tasteless and mechanical. Gordon turned in early, claiming exhaustion, but I stayed up for another hour, keeping the fire going and listening to the night sounds. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Closer, something small rustled through the underbrush, probably a marmot or ground squirrel. Normal sounds, comforting sounds. But underneath them, barely perceptible, there was something else. A quality to the darkness that felt aware. I told myself I was being foolish, that Gordon's nervousness had infected me, that I was letting my imagination run wild. I banked the fire and crawled into my tent, but despite my exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. We broke camp at first light, both of us moving with the efficient silence of experienced outdoorsmen. Gordon seemed more himself in the morning, the anxiety of the previous evening apparently forgotten. We ate a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and bad coffee, packed our gear, and set out northwest, following our planned route deeper into the backcountry. The terrain grew rougher as we climbed, the forest thinning out into scattered copses of stunted pine and windswept granite outcroppings. By mid-morning, we'd left behind any semblance of maintained trail. This was true wilderness now, the kind of country where you navigate by compass and topographic map, where every ridge looks identical to the last, where getting turned around could mean wandering for days before finding your way back to civilization. I'd been through this area once before, 3 years earlier, and I thought I remembered the general layout. But something felt wrong. The landmarks I'd noted on my previous trip, a distinctive lightning-struck tree, a particular rock formation, were either gone or not where I remembered them. I checked my compass repeatedly, confirmed our coordinates with the GPS unit, but the nagging sense of disorientation persisted. "Roger," Gordon called from behind me. "Come look at this." I backtracked to where he'd stopped beside a small clearing. He was crouched down, examining something in the dirt. As I approached, I saw what had caught his attention. Tracks. But these weren't the crisp, clear prints you'd expect from a deer or elk. These were strange. Long, deep gouges in the earth, as if something heavy had been dragged through the clearing. The marks were roughly parallel, spaced about 2 feet apart, and they disappeared into the tree line on the far side of the clearing. "What do you think made those?" Gordon asked, his voice tight. I knelt beside the tracks, studying them carefully. They were fresh, the edges of the disturbed earth still sharp and distinct, not yet weathered by wind or rain. Whatever had made them had passed through recently, possibly within the last few hours. "Could be a bear," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they didn't fit. Bears leave distinct paw prints, even when dragging a kill. These marks were too uniform, too deliberate. Maybe dragging a carcass. "Maybe," Gordon said, but he didn't sound convinced. We should have turned back then. Every instinct I'd developed over 6 years in the wilderness was screaming at me to reverse course, to get out of this area and report what we'd found. But pride and curiosity are powerful motivators, and I'd spent too long in these mountains to be spooked by some unusual tracks. "Let's follow them a bit," I said. "See where they lead." Gordon's face showed his reluctance, but he nodded. We adjusted our course, following the drag marks into the trees. The forest here was different from what we'd passed through earlier. Darker, the trees growing closer together, their branches interlocking overhead to create a canopy that blocked out much of the morning sun. The temperature dropped noticeably, and our breath began to mist in the cold air. The tracks led us deeper into this shadowed woodland, winding between massive pine trunks and overfallen logs. Several times we lost the trail entirely, only to pick it up again a few yards away. Whoever, or whatever, had made these marks had been moving with purpose, heading in a generally northwest direction, deeper into the most remote section of the range. After about 40 minutes of following the tracks, we entered a small valley I didn't recognize from any of my maps. It was a natural depression in the landscape, enclosed on 3 sides by steep granite walls and accessible only through the narrow gap we'd just passed through. The valley floor was maybe an acre in size, covered in sparse grass and scattered boulders. And it was here that the tracks ended. Not gradually, not fading out as they might if whatever made them had simply changed direction. They just stopped, mid-stride, as if whatever created them had simply vanished into air. Gordon and I stood at the end of the trail, staring at the point where the marks terminated, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "That's not possible," Gordon said quietly. I walked a slow circle around the area, looking for any continuation of the trail, any sign of where the thing might have gone. But there was nothing. The surrounding grass was undisturbed. The boulders showed no signs of being climbed over, and the granite walls were too sheer to scale without equipment. "There has to be an explanation," I said, more to myself than to Gordon. "Maybe we lost the trail earlier and these are older tracks. Maybe—" "Roger." Something in Gordon's voice made me freeze. I turned to look at him. He was staring past me, toward the far end of the valley, his face drained of color. I followed his gaze. At first I didn't see it. The shadows were deep in that corner of the valley, and my eyes had trouble adjusting after the relative brightness of the open space. But then I saw movement. Slow, deliberate movement, and a shape began to emerge from the darkness beneath the granite wall. It was a person, or at least it had been a person once. The figure that stumbled into the weak sunlight was barely recognizable as human. It was hunched over, moving with a lurching, uneven gait that suggested severe injury or illness. The clothes it wore were torn and filthy, hanging in tatters from a frame that seemed impossibly thin. But it was the smell that hit me first. Even from 50 yards away, I could smell death and decay, the sickly sweet stench of rotting flesh. "Hello?" I called out, my hand instinctively moving to the radio on my belt. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The figure stopped. For a long moment, it remained perfectly still. Then, slowly, it turned its head toward us. I wish I could forget what I saw in that moment. I wish I could convince myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by altitude and exhaustion. But the images burned into my memory with perfect clarity, a face that was wrong in ways I still struggled to articulate. The features were human, eyes, nose, mouth, but their proportions and positions were subtly off, as if someone had tried to recreate a human face from memory and gotten the details wrong. The eyes were too far apart, the mouth too wide, and when it opened to breathe, I saw too many teeth, all of them broken and blackened. "We need to leave," Gordon whispered beside me. "Right now." The figure took a step toward us, then another. Its movement was wrong, too. Joints bending at angles that shouldn't have been possible, weight shifting in ways that defied biomechanics. It was moving faster now, not running but somehow covering ground more quickly than its awkward gait should have allowed. I didn't argue with Gordon. We turned and ran. The narrow gap we'd entered through seemed impossibly far away. My pack bounced heavily on my back, throwing off my balance, and I nearly went down twice on the uneven ground. Behind us I could hear the thing following. Not footsteps exactly, but a dragging, scraping sound, like something being pulled across stone. We burst through the gap and back into the forest, branches whipping at our faces as we crashed through the undergrowth. I'd lost all sense of direction. All that mattered was putting distance between us and whatever that thing was. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but terror drove me forward. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time lost all meaning in that headlong flight through the trees. Eventually, Gordon grabbed my arm, forcing me to stop. We stood doubled over, gasping for breath, listening. The forest was silent. Not the natural silence of a calm day, but the absolute absence of sound that meant something was wrong. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the branches, just our labored breathing and the hammering of my heart. "Did we lose it?" Gordon panted. I shook my head, not in negation but in uncertainty. I had no idea where we were, where the thing was, or even which direction we'd come from. I pulled out my compass with trembling hands, but the needle spun uselessly, unable to find north. "The compass is broken," I said, hearing the panic in my own voice. Gordon checked his GPS unit, but the screen showed only an error message. No satellite connection, no position data. Both of us tried our radios, but we got nothing except static. We were lost in the wilderness, our equipment failing with something hunting us through the trees. And as the afternoon sun began its descent toward evening, I realized with growing horror that we had perhaps 3 hours of daylight left. 3 hours to find shelter, to make sense of what was happening, to survive whatever darkness would bring. I forced myself to think rationally despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. panic would kill us faster than anything else out here. I'd survived worse situations, or at least I'd always told myself I had, but nothing in my training or experience had prepared me for this. "We need to find high ground," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Get oriented, figure out where we are." Gordon nodded, his face pale but determined. We chose a direction, mostly at random, since our instruments were useless, and began climbing. The terrain grew steeper, forcing us to use our hands as much as our feet, scrambling over lichen-covered boulders and through thick stands of pine. As we climbed, I became aware of a new problem. We were being followed. Not closely. Whatever was tracking us was keeping its distance, staying just out of sight. But every few minutes I'd hear a sound that didn't belong. A branch breaking where no wind blew, a scatter of pebbles displaced by something moving through the rocks above us, or that same dragging, scraping sound we'd heard in the valley. Gordon heard it too. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his head swiveled constantly, trying to pinpoint the source of the sounds. Once he started to speak, but I held up a hand for silence. In country like this, sounds could carry for miles, and I didn't want to give away our position any more than necessary. We reached a ridgeline just as the sun touched the western peaks. From our vantage point, I could see for miles. Rolling mountains covered in dense forest, broken by occasional alpine meadows and bare granite slopes. But nothing looked familiar. The landmarks I should have recognized were either hidden by the terrain or simply not there. It was as if we'd somehow wandered into a completely different range, though I knew that was impossible. "There," Gordon said, pointing to a cluster of large boulders about 100 yards north along the ridge. "We could make camp there. Defensible position." He was right. The boulders formed a natural shelter, with several narrow gaps between them that would allow us to see anyone, or anything, approaching. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than trying to set up camp in the open. We made our way to the rocks and quickly set about preparing for the night. Neither of us bothered with tents. We needed to stay alert, to be able to move quickly if necessary. Instead, we cleared a small space among the boulders, laid out our sleeping bags, and built a fire ring with stones. The fire was a risk. It would make our position visible for miles, but the alternative, spending the night in complete darkness, unable to see what might be approaching, was worse. I gathered wood while Gordon got the fire started, and soon we had a small blaze going, the flames providing both warmth and a psychological comfort that I desperately needed. As darkness fell, we rationed out some food and water, though neither of us had much appetite. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving us shaky and exhausted. My arm throbbed where I'd scraped it during our flight through the forest. Nothing serious, but the raw skin stung in the cold air. "What do you think that was?" Gordon asked quietly, staring into the flames. "Back in the valley?" I wanted to give him a rational answer, to explain it away as a confused hiker or someone suffering from hypothermia and exposure. But I couldn't lie to him, and I couldn't lie to myself. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it wasn't natural, and I think it's still out there." As if in response to my words, we heard it. That dragging, scraping sound, coming from somewhere below our position. It was moving slowly, methodically, working its way up the slope toward our camp. The sound would continue for several seconds, then stop, then start again, closer each time. Gordon grabbed his pack and pulled out a flare gun, standard safety equipment for backcountry rangers. Should I fire a signal? I considered it. A flare might bring help if there were any other rangers or hikers in the area, but it would also pinpoint our exact location to whatever was hunting us. And given how remote we were, the chances of anyone seeing the flare and being able to reach us before morning were slim. "Save it," I said. "If things get desperate, we'll use it." The scraping sound grew closer. I could see Gordon's hands shaking as he clutched the flare gun. My own fingers found the canister of bear spray on my belt, another standard piece of equipment that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. The sound stopped about 50 yards below our position. For several minutes there was only silence, Then I heard something new. Breathing. Deep, labored breathing, like someone who'd been running for miles. It came from multiple directions now, as if several people were surrounding our camp, hidden in the darkness beyond our fire's light. "Roger," Gordon whispered, his voice barely audible. "There's more than one." He was right. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond the firelight, I could make out shapes moving between the trees. 3, maybe 4 figures, circling our position. They moved with that same wrong gait we'd seen earlier, hunched and lurching, but somehow covering ground with disturbing speed. I fed more wood onto the fire, building it up until the flames leaped 3 feet high. The light pushed back the darkness, and for a moment, I thought I saw one of the figures clearly. Another impossibly thin form, its movements jerky and puppet-like, its face a pale blur in the shadows. "Show yourselves," I shouted, trying to inject authority into my voice despite my terror. "This is federal land. You're trespassing. Identify yourselves." The breathing stopped. The figures froze in place, and for a heartbeat, everything was perfectly still. Then they began to move again, but differently now. Instead of circling, they were closing in, tightening the ring around our camp with slow, deliberate steps. Gordon raised the flare gun, his hand surprisingly steady now. "On 3, he said quietly. "We run north toward that gap in the rocks. Don't stop for anything." I nodded, getting my feet under me, ready to move. Gordon counted down. 3, 2, 1. He fired the flare straight up. The brilliant red light arced into the sky, illuminating the entire ridgeline in a hellish crimson glow. And in that moment of clarity, I saw them clearly for the first time. There were 6 of them, not 3 or 4. They'd formed a complete circle around our camp, and they were close, much closer than I'd realized. But it was their faces that made my breath catch in my throat. Each one was subtly different, but they all shared that same wrongness, that same violation of human proportions, and they were all staring directly at us with eyes that reflected the flare's light like animals caught in headlights. We ran. The gap Gordon had spotted was maybe 20 yards away, but it felt like miles. Behind us, I heard sounds. Not quite screams, not quite growls, but something in between. A noise no human throat should be able to produce. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush, closer now, the things abandoning their slow approach for an all-out pursuit. I reached the gap first, barely squeezing through the narrow opening between 2 massive boulders. Gordon was right behind me, and then we were through, stumbling down the far side of the ridge, sliding more than running on the loose scree. The flare was still burning in the sky above us, casting our shadows long and distorted across the slope. We crashed through the forest in blind panic, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. I lost my pack somewhere in the darkness, heard it rip free from my shoulders, but didn't stop to retrieve it. All that mattered was escape, distance, survival. The sounds of pursuit faded, but I didn't trust the silence. We kept running until exhaustion forced us to stop, collapsing against a fallen log deep in a dense thicket of pine. My lungs felt like they were on fire, my legs trembled uncontrollably, and I could taste blood in my mouth from the exertion. The flare had burned out. We sat in complete darkness, listening to our own ragged breathing and the night sounds of the forest slowly returning. An owl called in the distance. Small things rustled in the underbrush. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But I knew we weren't safe. Whatever those things were, they were still out there. And we'd just lost all our supplies, our shelter, everything except what we carried on our belts and in our pockets. "We need to keep moving," I whispered after several minutes. "Get as far away from here as possible before sunrise." "Which direction?" Gordon asked, his voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. I had no answer. Without our compass or GPS, without any familiar landmarks, we were navigating blind. All I knew was that we needed to get lower, to find water, to make our way back toward anything resembling civilization. "Downhill," I said finally. Water flows downhill. If we can find a stream, we can follow it to a river, and rivers eventually lead to people. It was a plan of sorts. We hauled ourselves to our feet and began walking, moving slowly and carefully through the darkness, testing each step before committing our weight. It was agonizingly slow going, but the alternative, breaking an ankle or walking off a cliff in the darkness, was worse. Dawn found us miles from our abandoned camp, descending into a narrow ravine with steep walls on either side. We had no idea where we were, how far we'd traveled, or which direction we were heading. But we were alive, and for the moment, that was enough. The sun rose into a gray sky heavy with the promise of snow. By the thin morning light, I could see Gordon clearly for the first time since we'd fled our camp. He looked terrible, face scratched and bleeding from branches, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, skin pale except for the bruises already forming where he'd fallen during our flight. I probably looked no better. We stopped beside a small creek that trickled down the ravine, both of us drinking deeply despite knowing we should filter the water first. Giardia and parasites seemed like trivial concerns compared to what we'd experienced in the night. The cold water helped clear my head, and I tried to take stock of our situation. We'd lost almost everything. My pack with all our food, camping equipment, first aid supplies, and emergency gear was gone. Gordon still had his, but it had been damaged in the flight, one of the straps torn free, the frame bent, several items lost through tears in the fabric. Between us, we had 2 water bottles, the flare gun with 1 remaining flare, my bear spray, Gordon's knife, and the clothes on our backs. No GPS, no working compass, no radio. "We need to find a way out of this ravine," I said, studying the steep walls rising on either side of us. "Get to higher ground, see if we can spot any landmarks." Gordon nodded, too exhausted to speak. We followed the creek upward, hoping it would eventually lead us out of the confined space. The ravine grew narrower as we climbed, until we were forced to wade through the creek itself, the icy water numbing our feet through our boots. After an hour of difficult climbing, the ravine opened up onto a sloping meadow. I pulled myself over the edge and stood, taking in our surroundings. The meadow was perhaps a quarter-mile across, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and opening out onto a vista of mountains to the west. And there, maybe 2 miles away across the valley, I saw something that made my heart leap, a thin column of smoke rising into the gray sky. "There," I said, pointing it out to Gordon. "Someone's there. A camp, maybe a cabin." New energy flooded through us at the sight. We set off across the meadow at the fastest pace we could manage, driven by the hope of rescue, of safety, of some explanation for the nightmare we'd endured. The meadow gave way to forest again, and we plunged into the trees, following a game trail that seemed to lead in the right direction. But as we got closer, something began to trouble me. The smoke wasn't moving like wood smoke should. It rose straight up in a perfect column, unwavering despite the morning breeze. And there was no smell, no familiar scent of burning pine or oak. Nothing at all. We emerged from the trees into a clearing, and there before us was the source of the smoke. A small cabin, old and weathered, with smoke rising from its chimney. But the cabin itself was wrong. The windows were dark, no light showing from within. The door hung partially open, creaking slightly as it swung in the breeze, and the ground around the cabin was disturbed, marked with those same drag marks we'd seen the day before. "We should keep going," Gordon said quietly. "This doesn't feel right." He was correct, but I was desperate. We needed supplies, shelter, some way to contact the outside world. And maybe, I told myself, whoever lived here needed help. Maybe they were victims of the same things that had hunted us. I approached the cabin slowly, one hand on my bear spray, the other reaching for the door. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone home? We're park rangers. We need help." No response. The door swung open wider at my touch, revealing the dark interior. I could see a table, a few chairs, a cold fireplace, but the chimney was smoking. That made no sense. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The cabin was a single room, maybe 15 feet on a side. It had clearly been abandoned for years. The furniture was rotting, the floor covered in leaves and debris that had blown in through gaps in the walls. But on the table, looking completely out of place, was a park ranger's radio. My radio. The one that had been in my lost pack. My blood went cold as I stared at it. This was impossible. We'd traveled for hours, covered miles of difficult terrain. There was no way my pack could be here. Roger. Gordon's voice from the doorway was tight with fear. We need to leave. Now. I turned to look at him, and I saw what he'd seen. Carved into the wall beside the door, still fresh and oozing sap, was a message. Stay. We ran. Again. But this time it felt different. The forest seemed to shift and change around us, trails appearing and disappearing, the terrain refusing to make sense. We'd climb a ridge only to find ourselves at the bottom of a valley. We'd follow a stream that seemed to flow uphill. Gordon insisted we were walking in circles, and I was beginning to fear he was right. By midday, the snow began to fall. Light at first, then heavier, big wet flakes that clung to everything and obscured our vision. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I realized with growing dread that we were in serious danger of hypothermia. We'd been running on adrenaline and fear for nearly 24 hours, and our bodies were beginning to shut down. There, Gordon said, pointing to a rocky overhang visible through the snow. We need to get out of this weather. The overhang provided some shelter from the falling snow, and we huddled together in the small space, sharing what little warmth our bodies still generated. Gordon was shivering violently, his lips tinged blue. I knew I wasn't in much better shape. Tell me about Montana, I said, trying to keep him talking, keep him conscious. What made you transfer out here? He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought he might have fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice distant. There was an incident. A hiker died on my watch. I should have found them sooner. Should have organized the search better. The investigation cleared me, but I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked, I saw their family, asking me why I didn't save them. It wasn't your fault, I said, though I knew the words were meaningless. Guilt doesn't respond to logic. I thought coming here would help, he continued. Thought the isolation would be healing. But there's something wrong with this place, Roger. Something that's been wrong for a long time. You feel it too, don't you? I did. I'd felt it from my first day in the Wind River Range, that sense of wrongness lurking just beneath the surface beauty. I'd told myself it was just the isolation, the vastness, the weight of so much empty country. But it was more than that. The snow continued to fall, and the afternoon faded toward evening. We took turns trying to stay awake, though I'm not sure either of us succeeded. The cold seeped into our bones, and consciousness became a slippery thing, hard to hold on to. At some point, I'm not sure when, I heard Gordon cry out. I jerked awake to find him struggling to his feet, pointing into the snow-filled darkness beyond our shelter. They're here, he said. They've found us. I could see them too now, shapes moving through the falling snow, that same lurching gait, approaching our position from multiple directions. There were more of them now. I counted at least a dozen, maybe more, emerging from the storm. Gordon pulled out the flare gun, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Last one, he said. Make it count. He fired the flare into the sky, and for a brief moment, the entire scene was illuminated in brilliant red light. The figures froze, and I could see them clearly, dozens of them ringing our position close enough now that I could make out individual details. The faces, all different but all wrong. The movements, mechanical and organic simultaneously. And there, in the center of the group, something taller than the rest, something that might have been their leader or controller or simply another victim of whatever madness afflicted this place. The flare began to fall, and as its light faded, The figures began moving again, closing in. Gordon raised his knife, a pitiful defense against impossible odds. I clutched my bear spray, knowing it would be useless. And then, miraculously, I heard a sound that didn't belong, the distant whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter rotors. The figures heard it too. They stopped advancing, their heads tilting in unison toward the sky. The helicopter sound grew louder, and suddenly a spotlight swept across the slope, bright enough to turn night into day. The creatures, if that's what they were, scattered, moving with sudden speed back into the trees, leaving Gordon and me alone beneath the overhang. The helicopter hovered overhead, the downdraft from its rotors creating a whiteout of swirling snow. I could see the Park Service insignia on its side, could hear someone shouting through a loudspeaker, but I couldn't make out the words over the rotor noise. A basket descended from the helicopter, and hands, normal human hands, reached out to pull us to safety. The next hours were a blur. The flight to the hospital in Jackson, the doctors examining us, treating us for hypothermia and exposure. The questions from Park Service investigators, from local police, from people whose faces I don't remember and whose names I never learned. They told us we'd been missing for 3 days, not one. That we'd been found 23 miles from where we'd started our patrol, in an area that wasn't even part of our assigned territory. That our equipment had been scattered across miles of wilderness, found in places we couldn't possibly have reached given the timeline and our physical condition. They told us there had been other disappearances in the Wind River Range over the years. Hikers who vanished without a trace, hunters who never returned, local people who knew better than to venture into certain parts of the backcountry, who spoke in whispers about things that hunted in the deep woods. But most of all, they told us it was a bear attack, that we'd been pursued by a rogue grizzly, that our equipment failures were due to the extreme cold affecting our electronics, that what we'd seen were other hikers suffering from their own cases of hypothermia and exposure, their appearances distorted by our compromised mental state. The official report was filed, signed, and buried. Gordon took a medical discharge and moved back to Montana. I transferred to a different station, somewhere with more people, fewer trees, less silence. We don't talk anymore. We tried once to discuss what really happened out there, but the words wouldn't come. How do you articulate something that defies articulation? How do you explain what you saw when you're not sure yourself what was real and what was the product of fear and exhaustion? 20 years have passed. I'm 54 now, working a desk job, safe in the confines of civilization. But I still dream about the Wind River Range. I still hear that dragging, scraping sound in quiet moments. And sometimes in crowds I'll see a face that's just slightly wrong, proportions just slightly off, and I'll remember. I tell myself it was just exposure, just hypothermia-induced hallucinations. I tell myself that the human mind is fragile, that extreme stress can make us see things that aren't there. I tell myself that whatever happened in those mountains has a rational explanation, if only I could find it. But deep down, in a place I try not to examine too closely, I know the truth. There are places in this world where the normal rules don't apply, where things exist that shouldn't exist, where the boundaries between possible and impossible blur and fade. The Wind River Range is one of those places, and God help anyone who wanders too deep into its shadows, because once the wilderness decides to keep you, all the rational explanations in the world won't bring you back. I've told you everything I can remember. Make of it what you will. Believe it or dismiss it. That's your choice. But if you ever find yourself in the deep backcountry, in those places where humans rarely go and nature still holds dominion, remember this. Not everything that walks on two legs